Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the BTR stream. I am very excited to be joined by some of the foremost experts, absolute dream team in the field of Hermeticism, Kabbalah, all of this occult stuff that I was always really interested by. And thank you guys so much for subscribing. We are getting subscribers right now so much, and I really appreciate it. Guys, subscribe to our channel, Break the Rules, right now, and you will not be sorry. We have some of the best content. We are the absolute most underrated YouTube live stream channel of all time, and we are only growing by the minute thanks to your help. We are eternally grateful. Anyway, I want to introduce some of our guests here today. We're going to be having a couple of more guests coming in, but anyway, we have back with us the modern Hermeticist. Thank you so much for coming back. It's always a pleasure to see you. We have Dot Darling. We have Reverend Eric. We have Greg, a.k.a. A Cult of Personality. We got Hermes Thurston back with us. And, of course, we got the great Giovanni Panacchietti. And don't forget, if you guys go to patreon.com/breaktherules, $20 patronage is going to get you an exquisite, beautiful Japanese-style woodblock print from the great Gio Panacchietti. I'm going to put a picture of it right now as we go through the introductions. So speaking of introductions, let's start with Dot Darling. What got you into the field of Hermeticism, Kabbalah, etc. in the first place?
Hi, I'm Dot Darling, or Georgina. I got into the occult. It was really, I got into tarot first, and I was looking into like the correspondences, and I remember reading about the Kabbalistic correspondences.
Oh, can you speak a little bit louder to the mic?
Of course, yes. So I got into tarot, and I remember reading about the Kabbalistic correspondences, and I pretty much fell down a rabbit hole and got obsessed with the Tree of Life. I started reading a ton. I started practicing ceremonial magic, and now I'm really into Hermetic Kabbalah. I'm a Thelemite, and yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Reverend Eric.
Hi. Oh, same question?
Yes, same question.
Let's see. It was a long time ago for me, but I had been studying occult stuff for a long time when there was a person in town giving classes in Hermetic Kabbalah, so I started doing that. It was probably about like 20 years ago or so, and then a little while after that I got a copy of The Way of Hermes, which is a translation of the Corpus Hermeticum by Clement Salomon and some other folks, and I was reading it, and I had this sort of like religious experience. I guess I don't know that it's necessarily the same as what like born again Christians go through when they have that like born again moment, but I just remember reading the book and just having this feeling of like how beautiful it was and stuff like that. And so then I was like, all right, I'm a Hermeticist now. So and then, you know, I enjoy history and things, so I just got into it.
Excellent. And okay, that's it.
No.
Okay. Let's go to Hermes Thurston.
Cool, thank you. I kind of came to occultism and Hermeticism through Jodorowsky. Funnily enough, there was a movie, The Holy Mountain, that really featured a large extended discourse on the tarot, and that was the first time I had sort of ever really seen or heard about it. And I was like, well, what is this? And I began studying it, and like with Dot Darling, there's the sort of correspondences with the Tree of Life. Started reading a whole bunch of different stuff, and basically the rest is kind of history insofar as my introduction was concerned.
Excellent. A Cult of Personality.
Let's see. I smoked some salvia, and I had a crazy Kundalini experience when I was like 24, 25 maybe. And I couldn't figure out what the hell had happened, or like how I ended up out of my body, or what that even meant. And so I just started looking for answers as to what the hell that was, and how does someone, how can your perception be located outside the seeming nexus of perceptivity that is your body? And I didn't really know where to look, and I just kind of intuited that the occult and esoteric might have some clues, and they had some clues. And so it just got deeper and deeper from there. And I realized that that experience was not just like random experience. It was more of a way to find out more about reality.
And that brings us to Modern Hermeticist. We've had you on before, so I don't remember now. Everything just becomes a blur as you do these streams. If you had an introduction, but why not? Tell us a little bit about yourself for the people who don't know.
Right. So I'm Dan Attrell, aka the Modern Hermeticist on the internet. And I would say that my experience was probably a lot like Greg's. I always grew up in religion, so I was always surrounded by spirituality and things like that. I grew up in a, Protestant Bible believing family that was at a very close focus on scripture and things like that. So I always grew up around sacred texts, and I was always interested in looking at the more allegorical and spiritual levels of those texts. And I think that brought me into all kinds of things, but studied the mystery cults in university. That's kind of, as a historian, what I was interested in my 20s. And then that led me down the path of psychedelics, where I had very much an experience like Greg, where, it's ineffable. And how do you get your way out of that ineffability? And the occult, or Western esotericism in my case, had clues that allowed me to understand to some extent what happened to me in those kinds of experiences.
Thank you. And to be clear, how many people have had psychedelic experiences here that have influenced how they perceive reality? Show of hands. I know, Hermes, you can't really show hands, but you could tell me...
Yes, I have.
Yes, okay. That makes all of us, although I do find that there are practices, and we're going to get into this as the conversation goes, that one can do without the use of psychedelics that can unleash similar processes in the human body. So what I want to get started with right now is talking about historically, like if I were to look up right now Hermeticism, what is it according to Wikipedia? They talk about a lot of these practices coinciding with the advent of science, and it happened more or less around the Middle Ages. And one problem, like as someone who first came into this, who was looking at Hermeticism, as a skeptic, I could say, well, they just started inventing all of these things in the Middle Ages. And if you look at, for example, the Hebrew alphabet, which, while it does align, for example, with the runes that came, that came from the Germanic side, as well as the Sea Peoples, what do you call it? Who were the Sea Peoples again? They had that purple dye that the emperors like to use. Phoenicians. Phoenicians, yes. So if you look at the Phoenician alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, and the runes, and I'm going to put it up later, you'll see that it's very similar, but it's also much more primitive looking, not as clean as a lot of these Hebrew texts that are used in a lot of these practices. So to me, that was like, well, how could this be, spiritual or holy if they're just like improving on something that's even more ancient? What gives? Which one is the right one? So questions like that, as well as questions of, how much was all this stuff just made up by these medieval people who had nothing better to do, as opposed to it actually being something that they got from an older source, is something that I would be really interested in starting to talk about, starting with the cult of personality. I know you got to go sooner than everybody else, so I would really love your take on how you would address the skeptics who would talk about all this stuff just being created in the Middle Ages, not really being, or like the Emerald Tablets, we've never found these fucking tablets, what's going on there, all of these things that seem to be, for some people, like an act of forgery as opposed to something that's legitimately spiritual.
Okay, so the first question I would ask you is, why does something being older make it more legitimate or authentic? If we can answer that, then because otherwise, your question has an axiom, it has an assumption that the older is always better, more authentic, more legitimate, and something that came later is not as authentic, maybe made up, maybe misinterpreted. And like that is generally the way people think about it. But I don't know that that's necessarily true all the time. For instance, in the development of another esoteric tradition in Buddhism, the original teachings and the original system was very exoteric, mundane, and, you know, a monastic sort of thing. It was only later when you see Padmasambhava going into Tibet, where you have the development of this esoteric, highly magical systems. And those are all much later developments. Sure, they may have adopted some of the indigenous Bon traditions and assimilated those, but the view and the methods, most of the methods that he brought with him, they were innovations. That view, and when I say an innovation, I don't mean like he thought it up or developed it on his own. I mean, it came straight out of the numinous, the wholeness of wholeness. It was pure gnosis. And so gnosis doesn't really conform to timelines, or you can't authenticate it often. And if we're talking about Hermeticism or the occult, the esoteric, we're talking about gnosis. And so just because something is not old doesn't mean it's definitely illegitimate or inauthentic. So, and the other thing I would say is, in reading the works of the great Renaissance philosophers who brought this tradition forward, and I'm sure Dan can tell us more about this than I can, Pico della Mirandola, Marsilio Ficino, they brought forth this tradition from, as best they could, from ancient times, trying to look at ancient sources and figure out what was the view, what were the methods, what's the result supposed to be. And yeah, a lot of times I think they were interpreting from texts and getting teachings from people who may not have had a complete picture. So we get what we get. It doesn't mean it doesn't work, because in my experience, it does work. Your mileage may vary, of course, depending on your experience and level of proficiency. But you know, in my opinion, just because something's older doesn't make it better. My opinion is, if something works, then you should investigate why it works, and how can you make it work better. So I don't know, I guess that would be my response to that.
I would love for a modern Hermeticist to also comment on that.
Right. So building off on that, if it works, right? And so the idea is that Hermeticism is an accumulated tradition. It is cumulative. So it is not as ancient as people like it to be, because that's how they imbue it with an air of authority. But it is rather new, and it is the product of this intergenerational, international community sharing ideas and selecting what works and throwing out what doesn't work. Now, Hermes, the god, the name from which Hermeticism gets its name, was the syncretic figure, or was the figure syncretized with Thoth. Both are scribal gods. Both are gods of communication and gods of mediation. And so what Hermeticism is ultimately is the process of teaching. What is Hermetic is something being taught. And this is why we get Hermetic texts on alchemy, Hermetic texts on how to acquire gnosis, Hermetic texts on astral magic. You know, there's not much binding these various sub-branches together, except that there is an initiator figure initiating you into the mysteries, some scientific, some theological, that people wouldn't see a difference. They would all just see it as knowledge. Science of the physical world or science of the spiritual world, it's all just knowledge. It's all scientia. And that is really what Hermeticism is about. It is about teaching. And, the earliest reference you get to somebody calling themselves a Hermeticist is in the Renaissance. And that's Ludovico Lazzarelli saying, I am a Christian and a Hermeticist. He says that's the first time you ever see anybody saying, I am a Hermeticist, and it's in that context of I am both of these things.
How did the church or the Inquisition react to that? I don't know, was the Inquisition active around there at that time?
Yeah, definitely. But it was not unusual to talk about Hermes in the church. Hermes was this great figure that had foreseen, like the Sigils or like other prophets, they had foreseen, or Hermes had seen the Trinity. He had understood the Trinitarian mystery of the trifold composition of God. And he had expounded on the mysteries of the soul and talked about purification. And this is what someone like Ficino really dialed into this. He saw Hermes as a symbol of his ancient theology, of Christianity before Christianity. And so if he could get and collect all of these prisci theologi, these ancient theologians, Zoroaster, Hermes, Pythagoras, Plato, and if he could demonstrate in them that, look, even these pagans understood through some premonition that Christ was coming in the middle of history, then he could build an entire history of that. And so I think that is really, when we talk about Hermeticism, we have to think about it historically. Are we talking about the Corpus Hermeticum? Are we talking about astral magic in the 9th century, something like Picatrix? Are we talking about the pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica? Or are we talking about New Thought? We talked right before the show, we touched on Mary Baker Eddy and Christian Science and this kind of stuff. And there are actually quite a lot of ties between the underlying philosophy of Mary Baker Eddy and something like the Kabbalion. Now that is still a Hermetic work. This is still somebody teaching pseudonymously through veils. They are occulting what they are saying to make it more seductive, to draw people in. Because if you were just to tell people right off the bat, they wouldn't believe you or they wouldn't listen to you. And so what's important is that you set up these veils in order to draw people in and seduce them toward you. And that is, to me, the essence of Hermeticism. It is this esoteric, initiatory teaching tradition.
Very interesting. And now I want to turn to Dot Darling. There was a message that I got from a friend of mine recently, and it goes as follows, where he talks about a lot of the New Age movement. Let's see if I have it over here. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe as I am scrolling up my Discord in order to find what exactly he said. Don't forget to subscribe. It is almost there. It is almost here. I am going to search for it, but while I am searching for it, let me ask you about Thelema, about Crowley. What exactly was it in this particular aspect of this mystery cult that attracted you deeply into it? Now, I don't know how deeply you are into it. I don't know if you're doing all the practices that Crowley was doing back in the days, but let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty deep into Thelema. I mean, I'm not living his lifestyle. I'm not I'm not living like that. But I do rituals daily. I practice very, very heavily. And I think what pulled me to Thelema is I really like the notion Crowley has about true will. That really appeals to me. And I like the way the rituals are structured a lot. I find that the New Age movement really it doesn't connect with me in the same way, because I feel like some of the stuff that comes out of the New Age movement doesn't have a lot backing it. Like, I don't think that age makes things better. I think that's a natural human sort of impulse to go into because we get comforted when other people agree with us. And so we're kind of naturally inclined to think that if more people think this or that it's better. But I find some of the new age stuff, just the sourcing for it is kind of questionable to me. Like when people start talking about like things like star seeds, it seems like people don't really know where they're getting the information from. And so Thelema appealed to me because it's quite modern. I like that it connects to like modern life. It's very applicable as a modern person, but it still has these sort of older ritual techniques and these tie back to things like Kabbalah and whatnot.
When you say modern person, can you define what that is for you?
Well, I mean, someone who is living in the 21st century, who is sort of, I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat. Like realistically, it is very impractical to get like all the ritual supplies called for in some of these ancient grimoires. Like I get as close as I can, but realistically, I'm not going to be able to just like do the Melon ritual while I need to have a job and I need to do normal human tasks, right? Like I think the average person doesn't really have the ability to sort of devote their entire life to doing rituals all the time or like retreat society completely and complete the Melon ritual. It's just very impractical for the average person.
What's the Melon ritual?
Oh, it's a pretty famous ritual. It's from a book called the Book of Melon. It's this Kabbalist guy. Basically, it's a ritual where you leave society for a lot of months and you
By the way, your microphone is much better now, but keep going.
Sorry. You purify yourself. You do a lot of fasting, a lot of praying. You completely retreat from society, and then at the end, you sort of connect with your holy guardian angel and whatnot. And most people don't have the ability to like quit their job and go and do an elaborate ritual for up to 18 months. And Thelema, I feel like, allows you to do these ceremonial magic rituals and follow ideas like Kabbalah, but not have to like leave your life or go to such kind of these very difficult grimoire rituals that are hard to pull off in 2020 to the like degree that they're designed to be, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but what doesn't make sense is what exactly is experienced there. So some people would say, I felt a presence, or I do some kind of ritual, and, I had a pretty good day, so that confirms it. But let's actually go really deep into what exactly we're talking about here. Can we go to the extent of saying that Dot or any of the other person here, you do a certain ritual, and next thing you know, you are seeing an actual entity that is right in front of you, just as realistically as my hand is in front of my face right now? Can we go that far? Or where would your personal limit be as far as the things you were able to experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we do these rituals, it's definitely not going to be as intense as like at least at first, you're not going to see like a full physical entity pop up. It's going to typically, in my experience, be a lot more subtle, like changes in the air or like small sounds or something kind of in the corner of your eye. Typically, I've noticed that it's a lot less flashy than people would assume it is. Yeah, I mean, it's experiential. I find when I'm processing mystic experiences to sort of be a bit of a complex process. Like afterwards, the ritual's over, I have to sort of sit and mull over, oh, what exactly happened? What exactly does this mean? And it's a lot less clear cut than I think that we would assume it would be. I don't think it's as simple as like looking at your hand, right? I think that these mystic experiences are typically hard to process. There's typically a lot of kind of symbolism going on, and it's a lot less objective than as we would think it would be immediately, like based on Hollywood or something.
Well, this is what I'm trying to figure out for myself personally. I could only go by the experiences that I've personally had, most of which, well, let's face it, pretty much all of which have been in the mind's eye, where there is something that can be generated inside of the mind's eye. I talked about this ad nauseum for all the people who are used to it, but there are new people who are joining us on the stream today who have no idea who I am or anything that I'm about to say, so this is for you, and don't forget to subscribe. Anyway, I do a breathing technique called the Wim Hof Method. To make a long story short, I see a white light in the center, and it's able to generate other shapes, such as a triangle, such as a DNA helix. I see a lot of blue and purple vortexes, and they end up creating three-dimensional structures made out of lots of lights that are spinning around. Now, one person who I talked with said that when I'm seeing the structure, which looks kind of like the U.S. Capitol building that's constantly spinning, that's the best way I would describe this tower-like structure, what I'm actually seeing is Akasha. And this is one of the higher realms that's possible to go into. And, you know, I can, like, once my third eye starts vibrating like a small motor, I can zoom in, zoom out, rotate it around, kind of like I'm using a three-dimensional program like Maya. You know, that's funny, by the way, right? Like, there's a 3D program, it's called Maya. You know, Maya is an illusion. Anyway, what I'm curious about here is that this is my personal limit right now as far as what I'm able to see. Have you had any experiences, and this is for all the panelists, have you had any experiences that have transcended that and gone into a level where, like when I said earlier, I'm looking at my hand, what I mean is there would be a physical presence that I would be able to see, touch, maybe go through, I'm not sure, but basically have some physical presence that is not just limited to something you would see when you close your eyes or when you're in the dark. So I would love for anybody to address this. I know anybody who wants to go.
I'll address that. I think that sort of desire in a mystical experience is misunderstanding.
Yes.
I think that there are some experiences that you have before you can reach something like that, and one of the experiences you have is a realization that that perception and your sense of perception is not an authentic experience of reality itself. So, you know, you can come up with any sort of, you know, there are definitely lots of ways to have like weird ass hallucinations and that affect your perceptive senses, and you can achieve that through all kinds of physical effects, such as like drugs and you know, trance work and, you know, spinning in circles and like all sorts of things can affect your physical experience of reality. But when you're going for a mystical experience, even when you're, you know, if you're part of some sort of tradition that's trying to contact mystical beings or have conversations with gods or spirits or something like that, it's not necessarily, you know, by the time you get to the point where you're able to do that, it's not necessarily that you are making yourself hallucinate physically to have that happen. You're having an experience of a different type of reality. So, and I usually describe it as like an imaginal type of reality, but I think, you know, like, you know, I think Neoplatonists would have experienced it as something where they had ascended into, you know, a realm of ideals or forms. You know, I think Kabbalists who enter into like ecstatic trances to have that kind of experience, they have visions and not necessarily like angels popping into their living room, you know. In fact, you know, through the years and the different Kabbalistic teachers and experiences I've had, nobody has ever been focused on making angels show up for dinner. It's always been more like your consciousness ascending to their level or transforming to their level rather than them coming down here.
And that's another thing I'm very interested in. When you're saying your consciousness ascending into their level, is there a bridge between a state where, let's say you are on LSD or you're on mushrooms or you're on, I don't know, whatever, and you close your eyes and through whichever processes, you would be able to have certain parts of your brain light up, or however you want to say this, where images like the one that I talked about earlier, and in fact I have it right over here in the btr-chat, they would be able to be generated. So over here you could see, for example, it starts simply from having two different colors. Then I can construct primitive letters of the alphabet. You know, this is the letter A, this is the letter B. And finally over here you see this DNA helix with this tower shape spinning around it. So the reason why I bring this up is this is something, like I said before, which can be seen in the quote-unquote mind's eye. But then the going up into the spiritual realm that you're describing, it's not, from what I'm getting, the brain creating lights in certain places that you are then seeing when you close your eyes. This is some other way to perceive things. But if there's, let's say, no body, no eye, no mechanism to perceive it, who exactly is perceiving? Are there sets of eyes that are perceiving these things? Or if there aren't eyes, what is the perception here? And how does that perception differ from, let's say, the perception I described here?
Are you defined purely by what you perceive and how you perceive?
I'm sure I'm not. I'm just trying to imagine what
I mean,
exactly
the
the
fact,
process is here.
Well,
I mean, it's just that, oh, somebody else was talking. You go, whoever was talking.
Greg, was that
I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but, and I'm sorry for doing so,
it's-
but what you're talking about really is, you're like trying to bridge between the duality of our perceptual experience and the non-duality of reality itself. So awareness, and I don't want to use the word consciousness, just awareness itself. And these are teachings that, it's taken me many years now to even begin to understand, but awareness and the appearance of everything that we see, feel, experience, think, all of it, it's not separate from awareness. The awareness and the appearance are not two. So yes, our body mind is the nexus of our perceptivity, but it's not in no way the limit of perceptivity itself. Awareness and appearance are not two. So your body and your mind are in no way a limit. They're just a starting point, really. But you have to kind of unlearn your habitual way of perceiving things, where we think like, well, I'm the subject and everything else is an object, and it's separated, and they're all things, and I'm a being. Because then you've set up duality, and that's ultimately a mistake if you're trying to perceive reality itself. And so I would say, like, all the things you're seeing, or any beings that you're interacting with, whether they're human or spiritual or whatever, like, what's the point? For me, the point is gnosis. So for me, like a retreat situation would be like doing a practice that's in Tantra called Guru Yoga, where it's basically trying to unite your mind with awareness itself. And so if you're successful in that, which is not a given, perceptivity is happening, and the you, or the I am itself, is gone, but perceiving is happening, and then there's nothing it's to be perceived, because it's all, I would say it's all one thing, but even the word one leaves a bad taste in my mouth, because it's not really anything. So in that moment, perception's happening, I'm not there, nothing's there, there's no God even at that point. It's just all awareness appearance as not two, and the perception's going on, and it doesn't really make any sense rationally at all.
You've passed Kether and you've gone into the Ein Self.
I mean, that's what's called the tongue-tip taste of the nature of mind, not mind itself. It's like prior to consciousness even. So these are pretty wild claims. I don't expect anyone to take it at face value, but I would urge you to try it yourself, because it's far more interesting and enticing than anything else I've tried.
Very interesting. And since right now we're talking about the top, let's talk about the bottom. So my friend sent me this comment about the New Age movement, and it goes as follows. The best thing about the New Age movement was that it was calibrated to send people to the right places. the spirits were merciful in the way that they delivered this information. So people who go into astral projection and stuff through New Age sources usually end up tunneling for Akasha, which is, again, according to him, that tower that I showed you earlier. But anyway, he says, in the upper worlds and lower worlds, which are all inner and outer worlds, by the way, but most people go upper, which is safer, the white path of exploration. In Tibet, they wouldn't teach you about the lower worlds for quite some time. The internet complicates this, obviously, but then the ultimate secret, which anyone who is able to freely dream like this already knows, is that both are non-dual, and in both white and black, as the Taoists know, there is potential for evil. Both forces can be very evil and very good. The black destroys ruined lineages and brings tyrants to heel. It also unleashes diseases and terrifies humans so that they don't get too ignorant. So it's a very interesting thing. Would anybody disagree or want to add anything to that statement?
Well, since we're on the topic of Kabbalah and Hermeticism, we could probably root this in Kabbalah and Hermeticism. In Hermeticism, there is an idea of avenging angels. And presumably, this is probably linked with the Furies from Greek mythology, or perhaps spirits from the underworld in Egyptian mythology that torment sinners after death, this sort of thing. So the Corpus Hermeticum says things like, I pity you if you don't have children because you're going to be tormented in the afterlife by demons. Now, Pico della Mirandola read that kind of stuff and he was like, oh man. And he equated this with the Qliphoth, with the inverted tree of life with the shells. And there are, I think, 12 Avengers in the Corpus Hermeticum, but he makes them 10 so that he can force that one-to-one equation between the two systems, which, they love doing that kind of stuff. And I think that is really one of the ways that it is explored within Kabbalah, but they're shells. So it's not that you won't get up to the boundless light by the same path. It's not sort of like this left hand, like the left hand and the right hand path. That's mercy and severity. It's not good and evil. And so those are the two pathways to the divine. And the idea is to unify those two in perfect balance, not to pick one path to go to the divine with. So I don't know, if you look at things traditionally speaking, most people who are climbing up through the Qliphoth are, well, of course, like Gnostic Satanists, usually guys like the Temple of the Black Light or the misanthropic Luciferian order. These are guys that usually commit suicide in rituals in order to fully self-abnegate and fully shed their corporeality. And so
Dad, you're not going to be too into that, are you? No.
Well, no, I don't want to cluster everybody in together, under one umbrella. Thelema is actually not that evil in the grand scheme of things when you compare it to other types of misanthropic orders.
It's more about having fun than
well, it's love is the law still. Love under will, but love is the law. So you got to keep those in a constant tension.
Now I have to ask, now my introduction to Kabbalah was through Dragon's Rouge, writings by Thomas Carlson. I don't know if you've heard of him. They don't seem like the overt Satanist type, but they are left-hand path, like Hermetic Kabbalists. I was just seeing if you'd heard of them, if you had any takes on them.
I read one of his books. I read The Night Side of the Runes, the one where he connects to Kabbalah. We're talking about the same writer, right?
That's the same guy. Yeah. I was referencing his book. I pronounce it differently than you guys because I I've never heard it pronounced. So Kalipit, Kabbalah, and Geoetic Magic. And he goes into, oh, is my stuff up? Okay. And it's a bit different than the Night Side, but yeah, it's the same guy.
I'm gonna put up a cover right now.
Yeah, I didn't realize when it took me like a couple chapters of reading Night Side of the Runes to realize how, like, I knew it was left-hand path pretty quickly, but like, I don't know, the way he writes didn't really completely feel the exact same as like when I think of like the left-hand path types, and then I realized it and I was like, oh, it's definitely, he has some interesting stuff. It's not my thing, but it's definitely, he's got some unique takes. I'll just say that.
Well, before we start going down in the, how do you pronounce that? I can never say it right. You know what I mean. By the way, beautiful cat. I want to shout out to this cat that the modern Hermeticist is holding right now. What an incredibly beautiful animal. And actually, speaking of that, I didn't mean to talk about familiars. I don't want this to be a podcast episode all over the place, but still, like, do cats play a role for yourself, modern Hermeticist, in terms of any ritual or companionship for the ritual?
Well, they're Saturnine animals, and if you're of a Saturnine nature and you want to keep that tempered, you got to have some Saturnine things in your life. So,
what does Saturnine mean?
As in, like, Saturn governs cats. So if you're trying to keep more Saturnine things in your life, then cats are one of those things.
Interesting. So what I wanted to get at here is, if we are talking about, let's say, runes, for instance, and then we're going to circle back to talking about Dot and Lilith and all that stuff, but when we're talking about either runes or the Hebrew letters or any of these different alphabets and what use they have, how do you translate these languages as well as all these different signs? Like, I know, Reverend Eric, your avatar also is some kind of a sigil. What exactly is it behind these sigils that make them work and make them effective, as well as the combination of sigils and letters?
Well, that's a good question. I missed the first part of the question, but it was something about translating languages and turning that into sigils and stuff like that. What makes sigils work? I'm not sure that. That's a tough one. You can go back and look at lots of different ways that sigils have been created and that information has kind of been encoded. And I'm not sure that everybody has always had the same idea. I suppose when I think about sigils, a lot of times I want to go all the way back to Agrippa. And he was he was definitely kind of a Christian Kabbalist who lived in the, 15th, 16th century. And he had this whole method of making sigils, or he came up with methods of making sigils that were very much tied into sort of like the way that the planets were viewed in, sort of magical hermetic senses. And I'm sure he probably has some sort of theory about why they work, but honestly, I think a lot of the stuff that goes into sigils, in particular working in various ways, is probably intent and shared intent. Probably the same reason alphabets work.
That's what I was going to add. That I'm sorry.
Hey, Hotep Sophia. Welcome, by the way, everybody. Welcome, Hotep Sophia. You're here for a short amount of time, I think, so I would also love, after the sigils talk, to get any questions you may have for these great panelists. But go on.
Okay. I was just going to say that as far as the sigils work, I think that Reverend Eric was basically saying what I was going to say, which is they work because of intention. Everything is intention based, and it's the same way that letters are accepted the way that they are. It's sort of, a similar thing. So I have a lot of sigils in my house, and I've looked at a lot of sigils. I don't know like the history, because that's not particularly my thing. I want to know like if it works or not, like today, as opposed to, what were people doing before. But I just noticed that when you have a particular sigil that a lot of people use, you draw on the energy of wherever the sigil is placed. So one particular sigil that I have is I can't remember what it's called, but they have printed out on stickers and they put it in a lot of different places. So it draws on the energy from the place where it is and sort of helps to like connect wherever you place your sigils to the other sigils. So it's kind of like a network web. And I just look at it the way that energy sort of flows. It's just an energy point. So that's all I was going to add.
I'd say my favorite sigil example is McDonald's golden arches. Like everybody knows it. It's ubiquitous. It's used around the world. And I mean, they make zillions of dollars. Maybe not zillions. I don't think that's a real number.
I'm just trying to find out what the reasons are, for example, for the sigil that I posted here, for there to be a twisty looking thing that goes down and then there's a circle. And I find that a lot is in the sigils. Like there's these, areas that are curved and they end at a round area. And sometimes they end like someone had a sigil that looked like 4 rakes going out. So what exactly are these circles for?
Oh, you're talking in specific about my Arnemancy sigil.
Yes, but I also find these in a lot of different sigils.
Well, that sigil in particular, if somebody were familiar with, for instance, like Agrippa's methods for sigils, I used some symbols that are common from his stuff. Like he always starts his sigils with a little circle and ends them with a little line.
Yeah, it's punctuation.
Yeah, it's like punctuation. Yeah, and aside from that, like the rest of it, I'm not gonna really give away the secrets of that sigil.
Oh, come on. Okay.
Mysterious on purpose.
Maybe you could just talk for a minute about the way a lot of sigils.
I mean,
are
I'll give my
formed.
take. Oh, sorry, my signal cut out. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I could do that. Probably the most popular way of making sigils right now is the method that was. I mean, it became super popular when Grant Morrison did his video in DisinfoCon, but I guess it's the Austin Osman Spar method of, taking a word or a phrase and paring it down into just a few letters by taking out duplicates and vowels, and then munging all those letters together into into some sort of symbol that they then sort of like spruce up in whatever way they want. A lot of sigil creation is spontaneous and inspired and doesn't even really have rules. But there's also methods like you go back to Agrippa, like the magic square method. You would take the magic square for Saturn, for instance, which is a 9x9 square with specific mathematical properties. You would take a name of a spirit, or nowadays people use them for sigils for intent as well. You would break it down you'd break down the letters into numbers and trace the design on the square and come up with something weird. I feel like I get asked this question often enough that my copy of Agrippa probably just falls open to that page, and I could try to find the page for you. But yeah, I mean, but it goes even further from there. Some people just draw art and turn it into a sigil. Some people use magical alphabets, like we were talking about before, and use those to create sigils. There's also stuff like the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, or the Aik Bakar, which is similar to that, which uses kind of like a pig pen cipher to create sigils. There's all kinds of stuff. There's so many different methods. And then the sigil itself is either, frequently are used in various types of magical or religious ceremonies and rituals.
I just don't know if a lot of these sigils are created equal. If we're talking about something like the Sri Yantra, which technically speaking is not a sigil, but it's something that's been revered amongst practitioners as being a very effective way of going into a transcendental state. So when we're talking about things that do seem to be closer to this primordial truth, whether it's the key of Solomon, which has, like the Star of David, like the 2 triangles meeting up together, if things do flow around things coming out of the center, kind of like I was talking about before with the visions, because I would also get like a vision of a triangle or a vision of a 5-pointed star in the center. So that to me shows that there are certain things that aren't just, you know, you think of something and you just draw like a picture of a kitty cat and all of a sudden your white kitty cat becomes a sigil for somebody else. You know, at a certain point we got to say no, you know, like sure, everything could be a sigil, but then like could we still limit it to something where we could say these sigils over here, there's a reason why they were the way they were. That's what I'm kind of trying to get at here.
I'd say everything kind of is a sigil, definitely on a spectrum, you know, from the most mundane to the most complex. You know, I mean, sigils convey meaning. There are ones that are extremely useful. You know, you guys are all typing into the computer right now, like how are letters not sigils? How is your triangle or your 5-pointed star not a sigil? I mean, what do you think of when you see the 5-pointed star? Does it bring thoughts into your mind?
Well, the 5-pointed
Is that on
star,
purpose? And who did that?
It's a human being. It's a human being with their arms and legs splayed out, but not the penis area.
I mean,
See, that's another interesting thing, by the way. If we're talking about the pentagram, for instance, if we're talking about like the cube, the idea of 666, you know, like material reality, we're talking about corporeal reality. But the 5-pointed star doesn't really have that penis. It doesn't really have that generative energy. It's more just going up. So that's always been a very interesting thing for me to think about. How
okay, well that's interesting to me, because when I see the 5-pointed star, I do not think of oh, there's a symbol for humankind, oh my god, where's his dong? What I think of is like, oh, I can use the 5-pointed star to calculate the golden ratio.
Well, I think that's a part of it too. I think it's part of everything. But Caustic Dreamer, you wanted to say something regarding the sigils and runes and things of that nature as well, right?
Yeah. I just didn't want to interrupt, and I knew my signal was being bad, so I was after the first attempt. I just kind of stood quiet for a bit. Yeah. So from what Hotep Sophia was describing, it sounded like she was using like sigils in a fashion akin to like egregoric work, where people would invest energy into and draw energy out like a bank. And usually the way I always understood sigils, like it's like comparable to like memetics, where it draws upon like archetypes, which meme analysis would be perfect for this part of the conversation. Lev probably remembers him.
Yeah, let me ask him if he can come in. I'm not sure, but let's see. But go on.
Okay. But essentially, you're drawing from like archetypes when you're using sigils and whatnot. And I also have a bit of a agnostic take on it, where what you're trying to do is encapsulate some divine abstract, like some aspect of like higher emanation into a physical form, like a sound or something that can be observed, like obviously the written letter. And while it loses something by being encapsulated with substance, which can be interpreted as like a form of encapsulating like a divine abstract within a kalipit. Yeah, hot take, I don't know, maybe. It loses something, but it still has like some of the potency. But that's always been my take on it.
Interesting. And we also have a comment over here from Sarah Nokomis. I want to hear more about the golden ratio 5-pointed star connection. There was a Donald Duck cartoon I remember from Disney that talked about that, but I feel like we'd get sued by Disney if we put it up even in the thumbnail mode.
Oh, but you can mention it because it's totally on YouTube. Donald Duck in Math Magic Land. It's pretty good.
It's actually a very fantastic little comic book cartoon section. Really recommend it.
For sure. But basically, and it's hard to explain without drawing it out, but if you imagine sort of like the horizontal bar of a pentagram, if you add the middle segment and either of the side segments and divide it by the other segment, you get the golden ratio every time. And Donald in Math Magic Land, I'll show you how to do that.
Interesting. And Hotep Sophia, what question would you be the most interested in asking a lot of these panelists having to do with Kabbalah, occultism, Hermeticism, things of that nature?
I'd like to maybe get their perspective on how people are managing these sort of isolationist behaviors that we're all stuck in today with the lock-ins and stuff like that. Like how would you view that through your lens? It seems like a lot of people are now panicking that seasonal depression is getting ready to start up, and I'm just wondering how I would, approach people, or maybe give them some other things to focus on besides the isolation that is being, I guess, locked down, voluntarily locking yourself in, for one, and then like also not really having any spiritual foundation to go off of. So what is your perspective on this sort of lockdown of society and how it's affecting people?
Modern Hermeticist, do you want to take a shot?
Pardon?
Do you want to take a shot at Sophia's question?
Oh, what was the question specifically?
How are people dealing right now, or how would you recommend people deal with the fact that we're all isolated right now post-COVID? And also, I can add on top of that question, there is a very interesting book that I was reading right now. Let's see, it's called Yuga, and it's by Marty Glass. And it also talks about we are entering, according to Marty, into the Kali Yuga. And it has to do with this instrumentalization of humanity into these isolated units, and the frustration that's going to bring people who, through all their humanity, have had a root to something bigger than themselves, whether it was certain religious practices or being part of a community. With this kind of social isolation, that's probably with the advent of artificial intelligence. I think, for me personally, it may come into a situation where the AI starts getting more human, but the humans start becoming more robotic and more like the AI because they aren't exposed to, like, just like the mystery schools we were talking about earlier. There used to be various traditions people were into, now not so much. So it's kind of like, what do you see happening, let's say, in the short amount of time and then the longer amount of time for humanity once it becomes so isolated away from a lot of these traditional things?
Well, I mean, I might not be the right person to ask because I live my life mostly like a monk. Like, I don't leave the house very often, and I'm not really a model for good.
Humanity,
Same here, brother.
How does humanity deal with this, though? I mean, I'm not really a person who leaves my house much either, but I'm curious about how average people, the normies, basically are going to be able to deal with this sort of thing. I just
think people are going to snap eventually. I don't think people are going to deal with it. I think the pressure will sort of rise until people snap, and there will reach a breaking point where there will be different problems to deal with other than lockdowns, I think. So we'll see. I think we're just waiting on the backlash of some of the economic decisions that were made at the top, with printing money through the Federal Reserve. We're still waiting on the inflation hit from something like 22% of the amount of money that's in the system right now was printed in 2020. So we'll see. I don't know if there's going to be some sort of, I'm not counting on any gradual awakening or anything like that. I just think people will get fed up at a certain point and snap.
Yeah, I've noticed here in my city that people have pretty much just started going out. Like, people have begun more or less pretending the pandemic doesn't exist. I think that as individuals, it would be a great time to start a spiritual practice if you don't have one. I mean, I feel like to avoid snapping, even doing something as basic as just meditating, right? I think would improve your mental health and help you sort of cope with all this. I think right now, people as a society just need to learn how to cope on an individual level. I saw some weird takes about how people were saying COVID was some giant awakening. I think that's really, a really toxic way to think about it, and kind of disturbing. Like, I saw some more new age takes that this was like a sign of a great awakening and these people dying was a good thing. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a disturbing way to take this. You know, I think that we need to just learn to be kinder to each other and process all this stress on an individual level. And turning to personal spirituality is great. But I think we shouldn't try to pretend the pandemic is some great, wonderful thing, and be kind of honest about the situation and learn how to deal with it in our own little microcosmic lives and take care of ourselves.
That was really well
I've got
said.
a
Yeah.
Sorry, Lev. I was going to say I've got, or rather, I know of an occultist who might be relevant here for anyone listening. A guy named Damien Echols. He was on death row in isolation for something like 10 years. And in his talks, I haven't read his books yet, but I've listened to some of his lectures. He describes using his meditation and his magical practice as a way to ultimately astral travel. He didn't like the term, but I'm just using it as a shorthand, and experience the world outside of his cell. So his story is fascinating. He was recently on the Netflix show Midnight Express, episode 5, I believe. It was a fantastic episode. So again, sort of for anyone who's struggling with isolation, they might look into his story, because I've found it personally very, very edifying. And he describes, similar to what Dot Darling was just talking about, how starting your own practice, starting at the very beginning and just working your way forward, is a way to responsibly combat pretty horrible isolation. So that's a person that a resource that people might look into.
Yeah, Damien Echols, his books are great. He talks a lot, and he talked at one point in his book how he had to use, like, rather than a flute, that was like a cup that he, like a plastic cup that he had, and he talks about like how you can do these rituals in a sort of way that works for your circumstances, which is really applicable for people in isolation, and sort of how to deal with trauma through esoterica and the occult. I think his books are groundbreaking, and I think he's doing some amazing teaching right now. Really, really highly recommend his stuff.
And we also had a comment from a Caustic Dreamer in the chat over here, being encapsulated. Well, I guess since you're actually here, you can actually say it, and I don't have to. So.
Oh, okay, awesome. I just hate interrupting people, but if I don't write it out, I'm gonna forget it. So, yeah, I was talking about how being encapsulated within a shell made from dead trees and not being able to go outside is pretty, like, overtly cliffothic. How the fuck do you say that word?
Depends.
But yeah,
It really
like,
depends.
you get what I'm saying, though, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think, like I mentioned earlier before I made that specific post, like, I think a lot of left-hand path initiates are gonna come out of this.
Perhaps you're right. And also, I have a question which is sort of related to this, but it's not talking about the dark side so much as talking about the inner side. So there was a very interesting YouTube video that I saw a long time ago. I don't remember who it's by, but it's this guy who did 25 grams of mushrooms, and then he went into such a deep state where he ended up, as he said, shrinking down to the, beyond the cellular level, to what he described as these factories that were producing atoms. And I've heard this from other people as well who were not familiar with this guy's work. And that's something that people may have described in a way from the machine elf conversation when people talk about DMT. But it is another very interesting thing for me to think about. What exactly are these factories, and do they have a very important relationship to our physical reality that we're just not aware of? Are these factories perhaps the ones that are responsible for the building of our material reality? I know, Greg, you've done some very intense sessions from what I understand in your time. I'm not sure if you've had any experience with these factories that I'm talking about, but let me know.
No, I mean, ultimately, like, experiences are just interpretations of perception. whether it's thoughts or feelings or visions or even seeing across the room. So the wisdom teachings that I follow basically tell me that this is all light, that the idea of substance material phenomena itself is a mistake. So there's, you know, like, do we take ourselves to be real beings? And that's a concept, but we don't arise independently. You know, we have parents, we live on the earth, we have to eat food, we have to breathe air, we have to have the company and companionship and love and support of other people to even survive. So on some level, like, I think this is all like really interesting, but for me, it all just leads back to this huge mystery, like, what the F is reality? And how am I supposed to understand it when the obstacle to understanding it is me?
Can I
And so
ask you
that's
something,
why we
Greg?
have the spiritual path. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm fascinated by what you're saying. It reminds me so much, and I hate to be a theory cell, but it reminds me very much of like Martin Heidegger, specifically when he talks about Dasein as being in the world, because it seems to me that what you're describing specifically with Hermeticism is almost like an apperception or a way of getting at what lies behind consciousness, which is like being itself, the being of beings. And it's
Even
not
beyond
so,
beingness,
yeah, yeah. And so I wanted to know, like, what is the sort of concrete like way of getting at this being of beings, or the all, or the one, and what is it that is different from largely the Western philosophic tradition of like being dualistic, like there is mind and body problem, there's, you know, perception, apperception, like you want to just get rid of all of that sort of like Cartesianism of like, I have a mind and this is my body and they're connected somehow. It's like, it's not even, it's like you're talking about something very more basic than that.
Yeah, I mean, this is really like, so what is reality? So you got to go like right to the building blocks. Like, what is reality? Reality is the divine knowing itself in some sort of playful frolic. At least that's what I've been told. And so what is the problem? The problem is our perception causes us to habitually mistake reality for duality, where I'm a subject, you're and everything else is an object. And then we're vulnerable and we're afraid, and we have to like navigate and negotiate this terrain to try to get what we think will make us happy. And then the things that we think make us happy actually cause us to suffer, because the only thing that truly makes us happy ultimately is meaningfulness, and that's divinity. They're the same thing. So when we can, and then the whole idea of the spiritual path comes in, because the function of the spiritual path is to then undo that mistaken perception, which often, like you were just saying, it involves engaging in efficacious falsehoods in order that we can hopefully see through them and then make progress. And so that's really like what this is all about. Not just Hermeticism or Kabbalah or the occult, but like any authentic spiritual path. That's what the goal is, really.
Would you have any interpretation as far as why that goal is there in the first place, as opposed to us already being oneness and not have to go through the process?
That's the thing. I mean, not many, but like some of these teachings that I follow, they're called a resultant path. And the reason they are called that is because the result of gnosis is really already present within all of us all the time. If it weren't, you could lose it if you got it, or you could be kicked out like in the Garden of Eden. But that's not the case. And so we already have this dormant, unrecognized gnosis. We can't access it, and we certainly can't act from it, but it's there, it exists. I mean, the Buddhists call it Buddha nature, and everyone has it. And so the spiritual path, if it's done right, is all about transforming one's perception so they can perceive their own gnosis, so they can see reality as it is, not as we are.
But then we're talking about two different paths. One path is going from the path of ignorance to enlightenment, like you just said. But then there is also this very interesting play that we're all a part of, like Shakespeare said, you know, the whole world's a stage and we are all actors, in which there are certain things that we can all agree upon seeing. When we wake up and we look up at the sky, we're going to see the sun unless there are clouds, in which case we can all agree that we're looking at clouds. This is why when I'm talking about certain things like these weird factories that I mentioned that are producing atoms, this would be something that I'm very interested in, whether it's just the dream state of the individuals or whether there are certain things inside this hive mind, Atman, Brahman consciousness framework where
so
we can't
this is
agree
where
upon them.
this is so the spiritual path will devise ways to describe this. Like we have collective phenomena like the sun, then you have individual phenomena like your machine elves or whatever you have. But at its ultimate basis, at the root, mind is mind. There's no my mind and your mind, it's just all mind. So that's why the path engages in these efficacious lies, right? Collective, individual, because that's how we experience the world. So if the path can't meet us where we are, it's useless. So it meets us where we are and then tries to bring us to reality. So that journey from delusion to wisdom is the same journey from suffering to joy, and it's the same journey from individual to collective, or, you know, non-duality. I mean, that's the way I see it. These are just my opinions.
I really like what you're saying there, Greg, and the image of the tarot flashed in my mind, where if you were to arrange just the major arcana, you have the Fool progressing through all the other ones and ending up at the World, thus going from the sort of individual blank slate, if you will, to the totality of experience and gnosis. And I actually had a question sort of in this similar vein for Dot Darling, in that there's the concept of the true will in Thelema, and I'm not very well versed in Crowley. How do you find that is both a personal and maybe more aggregate journey to gnosis, or even is it specifically a personal enlightenment direction?
Yeah, well, Crowley did say that ideally, if everyone is living in accordance to their true will, it should all work together in a harmonious way. Your will should not infringe on someone else's. They should ideally, emphasis on ideally, all work together, and then society become sort of evolved together, and we reach kind of this aeon of pure fulfillment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the end, before we can do all that, like the individual sort of does their true will thing, does their gnosis experience, and does this individually. I mean, part of the reason why we call it a spiritual path is because we're still walking it and figuring it out. I mean, what would the point of mysticism be if we knew all the answers? You know, like, I think a lot of these questions we can't cleanly answer, because the whole point of being a mystic and an occultist and seeking gnosis in the first place is because we crave more and we want something beyond what we have, and we want to figure out what we don't know, right? Because while these answers a lot of the times are inside of us, or something that we in retrospect look back and go, oh, why did I not get that, right? But like, why would we be doing mysticism if we knew everything? I think so much of this is we do these experiences so we can get a little bit further and a little bit closer to the divine, even if it's only a tiny, tiny bit. You know, it's a path, it's a journey. It's not an objective answer. Like a lot of spirituality is opinion for that reason.
Well, we also have a comment from Sarah Nokomis, every individual is a star, which reminded me again about the star thing that I mentioned earlier. But this also points to what you were talking about right now, self-fulfillment. It reminds me of the balance of severity and mercy, the two columns that we were talking about before, the ones that are present both in Hermeticism and in the Kabbalah. I feel like, and I'm curious if Gio could also say anything, as well as Hotep Sophia, that you guys have been noticing in society where, you know, there's that whole cycle of history that talks about how, to make a long story short, the more creature comforts we have, the weaker we end up being. Because for a lot of people, they do need some pressure in order to fight against. And if there's no pressure to fight against, then there's not going to be that much growth. So are there aspects that you guys are noticing within occult circles that are seeing the same things and that are trying to address them?
Well, it's interesting, like you brought up Marty Glass's book. As you know, that's like one of my favorites because it really weds a lot of political analysis, not just Marxism, but also you could say reactionary thought and the spiritual, because what we're seeing now is sort of what the reign of quantity, right? This is like the era of materialism, and even spiritual practice, I think, is affected by this. Because a question I have for people would be, what is the difference between something that is a synthesis of different traditions like Hermeticism or like Kabbalah? Well, Kabbalah is not a synthesis, but what would the difference be between that and, say, like the New Age movement that seemed to have been, what Terence McKenna calls a failed alchemy? Because it seems that the New Age movement was suspect to that same sort of drive of commodification like everything else. You could buy your own enlightenment. You could, I don't know, travel to India or travel to the Amazon basin and consume ayahuasca. And it's like you're some kind of hipster. But what is the difference between that and a lot of these, 19th century like European mysteries schools, whether it be Hermeticism or Rosicrucianism or whatnot? I guess I'm a modern Hermeticist. I guess this is a question for you. But anyone else, I mean, if you want to answer.
So, I mean, I guess I could tackle this really broadly. The question is like, what is the difference between Kabbalah and the New Age? Why is Kabbalah so lindy and why is New Age so cringe?
Yeah, there you go.
So the answer to this is that Kabbalah emerged as a way, as one of it's the problem of religious sophisticates, right? The more religious you become, the more you see yourself as different from the everyday, day-to-day exoteric practitioner. Now, in Judaism, they didn't want to erect those barriers. They didn't want to create a sort of like, oh, there are the hoi polloi, and then there are the educated. That is a concept that's sort of like within Judaism in the same way that it is within Christianity. Gentiles are the shadow cast by the Hebrew prophets in the same way that pagans are the shadows cast by the Catholic Church. But what Kabbalah did was it provided impetus. It gave weight to people practicing their religion, because the idea was that by performing the mitzvot, by doing the commandments actively, not just not doing things, but actively honoring your parents, for example, by doing things like that, you are somehow helping in the redemption of the world. You're causing changes in the supernal realm. And so this gave import and weight to people doing actions, sort of like talismanic magic, but it's moral. And the New Age just doesn't have that community that Judaism has. They don't have a shared history. In fact, what binds them together is the very lack of a shared history. It's this giant syncretic mess. And that's why it won't be Lindy. But Kabbalah, on the other hand, has just had centuries and centuries and centuries of time to adapt and develop. And that's something that has really gained a lot of force because the Jewish people were in exile and they needed certain traditions to, in the absence of the temple, to keep them as a coherent society. So I think that that's one of the reasons why Kabbalah endures and the New Age doesn't. But I did want to touch on one last thing, is that you said Kabbalah is not synthetic, or you said it was, and then you corrected yourself. Kabbalah is very much synthetic. It is very much a collection of many different traditions: Neoplatonic, the Hasidei Ashkenaz, the Spanish Kabbalah. Later on, you get Hermetic astral magic getting mixed up into it. And then there's all kinds of different variants of Gematria and Timura and Notarikon. There's just so many different kinds of things that we call Kabbalah, which just means tradition. And we clump that together and we say that's Jewish mysticism. Okay. But it is wrong to say that it's that Kabbalah is not synthetic. It's just that it was synthetic, and it was a path that, like Greg was saying before he left, that path came to meet people where they were. They didn't have to go and rise up to it and find some sort of ancient tradition in the Far East, in the Orient, that doesn't belong to them, and they're somehow alien in this. This is what Ficino does in the Renaissance, right, with this idea of Platonic Orientalism. But the Jews had it there all along. They just had to comb through their books. And then there were different kinds of Kabbalistic thinkers. And, Abulafia became one. Abraham Abulafia became a very popular thinker in the West, especially in like Catholic lands, but not so popular in Spain. And when all of the Jews got kicked out of Spain and Portugal in 1492 and 1496, they also got kicked out of Sicily. And they all went to the Holy Land in North Africa, and they brought those traditions with them. But then at that point, you had Christian Kabbalah through Pico della Mirandola, through Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, through these different Catholic thinkers who appropriated Kabbalah into Christianity and turned it into a kind of theosophy. And they really laid the groundwork for what we would later call just that, theosophy and Rosicrucianism and these kinds of various movements. So the New Age looks back on all of these various traditions and clumps them all together and kind of tries to see them as being all saying the same thing in some way or another. But if you really do go in and look into all these things, you'll see that very few of them at the level of detail are saying the same thing. And this is why you have guys like Pico della Mirandola writing 900 theses to, battle against the Averroists on the question of the soul. Like, does the soul get destroyed at death? Do I become one with the one, or do I become one in God's courtroom eternally because my soul is immortal? So these are the different kinds of things that were debated, and Kabbalah very much fits into all of these debates. So that's, I think, my 2 cents on New Age versus Kabbalah.
And we have a comment from Chocolate Milk 1. Are we talking about Kabbalah, or Quabbalah?
Good question. So Kabbalah with a C is what people usually use to describe the Latin Kabbalah, so Christian Kabbalah in the 16th century onward. Kabbalah with a K is usually Jewish Kabbalah, and then Kabbalah with a Q is the Hermetic Kabbalah of the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Also used by Nick Land.
Yeah, CCRU. And there is an interesting, there's this image that I posted. I'm going to blow it up for a second here for everybody. So this just shows different iterations of the Tree of Life. Like they're talking about like the Sumerian thing also being close. And it does seem like in comparison to the Caduceus, if you look at the right-hand side here, you have a tree and you have this wing thing above it. And that's also like a symbol of enlightenment. And, I've just grown so used to seeing this all over the place as far as this system that's both a spiritual system and something that could be coordinated to the human body. If we're talking about like the chakras, if we're talking about Kundalini, as well as the Kabbalistic tree of life over here. So when it comes to certain philosophical disagreements, I agree with you, modern Hermeticists, that those were definitely among all these different ways of looking at it. But just like I was talking earlier about how we all go and look at the sun and agree that the sun is in the sky, there would be, would you say, certain things having to do with processes in the human body that are mapped, like this image that I posted is mapping them out.
Right. So, I mean, I the problem with these images is that often they're trying to make one-to-one correspondences of systems where they don't exist. The thing with the snake is pretty, again, as we would say, Lindy. This motif of the two serpents intertwined around a pole goes all the way back to the Sumerian god Ningajita. And Ningajita is the herald of the mother goddess. So the earth mother sends forth the serpent from her bosom to send a message to the world above. And that's kind of how the serpent became this symbolic animal that links the underworld and the heavens. And usually he's climbing a tree. And I think this image, you get it in Epic of Gilgamesh, you get it in virtually every piece of classical literature I can think of.
And it's also balancing out. It's also balancing out with the two columns, whether you have snakes or whether you have lions or jaguars or whatever. You have somebody holding two things, balancing them out, and then something going up. The one thing that I'd say, just from my own experience, regardless of whether there are different interpretations, there is, at least I can confirm for myself, a process that you could feel in your back when you do breathing techniques, that you have a liquid-like energy that goes up your spine. So people have talked about how eventually it would go up through you and you would experience the sense of oneness and this very orgasmic feeling once it goes up. So it is in a way like having sex, except you're not having sex putting the sexual energy out. It's more like the sexual energy is going back in through you. So I was wondering if you and anybody else would like to comment on what exactly is going on here. Yes?
Early on those like mass image stitches where they just have
yes.
that look vaguely similar. I think that we as a spiritual, like even broader than like the esoteric hermetic community, we see things that look kind of similar cross-culturally or from different systems. And we see that there's some similarities and we go, yes, they are the same thing. And then we don't look into the nuance and the deeper history and the deeper understandings of how they, like things can be similar without people saying they're correspondences. And I think that's something that pops up a lot. People, like, especially like when people try to draw parallels between the runes and Kabbalah, like someone mentioned earlier, right? You can look at things and say, yeah, they're similar without saying, yes, these are the same thing. These are perfect correspondences. And I think we forget that you can like say things are similar without saying their correspondences are the same thing. Because when you make these big graphics of all these things next to each other, it implies they're the same thing, right? At least to my brain visually. I'm like, two things beside each other, comparison. And if there's no caption explaining the nuance, people are going to look at it and go, yes, this is a correspondence chart. And I think that's not the best way to explain things. I think we should say, it's cool that these things are similar and you can use your understanding of this to better gauge what that may mean without directly making these correspondences. Am I making any sense?
Absolutely you are, but this is another thing that I'm very curious about when it comes to something like the Kabbalistic tree of life, let's say, and the 7 chakras. There have been many images that I've seen, as I'm sure you have, where they try to put all of them together. What we could agree on is that, like, I think we first have to take a step back and define what the Sephiroth are. So, Dot, would you like to do the honors?
Well, I actually wanted to say the chakra one is really, really actually interesting because there's more than one chakra system, and the one we see in the West isn't even like the most like They're
Well,
like
it's all color coded, and the weird thing to me, like you tell me, because I think it's California that was responsible for the rainbow color, but at the same time, it does make sense from vibrations, colors, you know, like in the spectrum going up into higher vibrations, man. Like it does make sense that way. Yet the Hindus, they did not color them like that. They had different like smoky cloud colors and whatever. So what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, when we take Eastern concepts and we change them, especially as New Age is done for the West, they tend to look kind of different afterwards because a lot of the times they've sort of been adapted to better be understood by like Westerners, and also like a lot of these kind of New Agey things are somewhat simplified.
Like that's
So-
that's the example over here. See where you have the root chakra going into Malkuth, then you have the, I'm not going to pronounce that name, going to Foundation, but you know what I mean. Like, and they do seem to match up like beauty, the heart, you know, the balance right over here, right smack dab in the middle. And then the crown is the thousand petal lotus, which connects you to Brahman, much like the crown Keter. That's also the connection to this higher state. So I could look at certain things and say this chakra is saying something very similar to what this Sephiroth is saying. But how close could we get without making leaps like you were talking about earlier?
Well, you can. I think we should be able to, as a community, say things are similar and parallel without saying this is a correspondence. That's my hot take. For your answer of like what a Sephiroth is, a Sephiroth and like a chakra are quite different things, right? Because chakras are these energy wheels, right? A Sephiroth is an emanation of God. So they're not like literal like things like the way like a chakra, like when we talk about chakras, we think first of the point of the body with the spinning wheel, right? A Sephiroth is a way that God emanates through the world. So that's like a very kind of tricky comparison to draw because yeah, they're both like sort of concepts and we see them with circles explaining them, but it's a little bit of a different conversation when we talk about like energy wheels and like the Sephiroth, if that makes sense.
And what about the colors? So we have a comment from Philip Roy. Philip, thank you so much for watching. And everybody, don't forget to subscribe. I got to say that more often. And click the bell. Click the damn bell. Anyway, Philip Roy asks, wait, are my chakras the color I think they are? Because that's what I learned first. LMAO.
Well, it depends on the chakra system. There's more than one chakra system. In the Western, in like the common chakra system we see, yeah, but if you want to dive really deep, you can find multiple chakra systems and then it would be different. Yeah.
And Modern Hermeticist just wrote, we should play a game. Everyone tells their breakdown of the 7 planets to 10 Sephiroth correspondences and find out nobody overlaps. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I still don't really know why in the Hindu system they went with these colors that aren't in any kind of spectrum. Like we were saying earlier, older does not necessarily mean wiser. So maybe
Can I touch on that?
Go for it.
So colors are really, really subjective, and from culture, they're actually like linguistically broken up. So different languages have different words for different color ranges. And for some people, you know, red and purple are more similar, and green and brown and yellow are kind of on a spectrum. And so it really depends how your culture linguistically carves up colors. I know that when it comes to the planets, those were easy to figure out because the planets themselves were colored. So, you know, Saturn is this kind of brownish, tawny color. So they thought dark and tawny for Saturn, and they thought, you know, red for Mars. So Mars is red, and Venus is orange or like coppery color. So she gets the color of copper. And that's how you get the planetary correspondences. But when it comes to that really like clearly delineated rainbow spectrum of like Isaac Newton shooting light through a prism, that's actually a really late thing where people decided to carve up, and it was Isaac Newton decided to carve up the colors in accordance with 8 notes, or 12 whole tones or semitones, but 8 whole tones. and he made these correspondences between music and the colors. But you know, you could divide them up into 10 or a million or 5. It really depends how your culture carves up colors. So that's just to speak of colors, right?
True. I would assume that if we're going down the path of colors, then we can't not talk about music, harmonics, frequencies, vibrations, all these things. So when people talk about going into higher vibrations, like for example, I see a lot of blue and purple when I meditate. Pretty much all the time now. If I close my eyes and I'm in a dark room, there's always just like blue and purple everywhere. So what exactly is the process that's going on there, and how come there are, let's say, other people who would, let's say, see green or see other colors? And one more thing I would add to that, which is an interesting experiment that I did, where when I used to get high, when I used to take lots of weed, lots of, you know, actually it was more the what do you call it? I'm blanking out right now. See, this is what happens when I think of weed. When I think of weed, I start blanking out. But anyway, vaporizing, that's it. So when I was doing a lot of vaporization and I was doing the Wim Hof Method, I closed my eyes and I was able to see a very bright kind of color. And when I felt scared, I saw red. And when I felt more, you know, one with my environment, I saw really bright green. So what exactly is going on here in this example of colors, meaning vibrations, meaning the way that people feel?
I've got an answer for that one.
Go for it.
I would say you've been culturally conditioned to associate those particular colors with different moods and feelings and circumstances.
That's an interesting take. I mean,
we all have. You can't learn a language,
mm-hmm.
learn to put on clothes, learn to use YouTube without getting a very healthy dose of cultural conditioning.
But then where exactly, just like we were talking about in these other examples of the sigils and so forth, where exactly does the subjective experience stop and something that is much more objective to us start?
Well, I'm afraid that you're probably only having the subjective experience. And that's, you know, and our subjective experience is always informed by the you know, the symbol set and the filters and the stuff that we're sort of like taught or that you teach yourself. You know, you get exposed to these ideas whether you're trying to or not, just by like going outside or turning on the TV or talking to friends or having loved ones. You know, you're part of a culture, so a lot of this stuff is just built into you. Just it's like your default mode.
So would you disagree then with the concept of there being like the Akashic records or whatever you want to call it, certain things that people can tap into, which would talk about these higher archetypes?
No, I don't think that what I said would preclude that. I would say that, you know, you could look at those in different ways too. Like those could even be, you know, personifications or echoes of the culture that you are familiar with. You know, I mean, I'm not, and also, yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, in Western culture, we don't really have Akashic records. You know, that's something that we imported from India, but we still have, you know, like Jung's archetypes, or we have Plato's forms, or we have these deities, you know, like Greek deities who seem to be personifications of human attributes. You know, like this idea of personifying those sorts of things and having seemingly autonomous symbols or seemingly autonomous representations of them. Like that's old. We've been doing that for a long time.
So
it's way built into us.
So I guess the thing that I'm trying to find out here is still like, if it is way built to us, how much is it nature and how much is it nurture? And would you say it's a bit of both? When it comes to...
I'm not sure. Well, I mean, so like the difference between nature and nurture is this concept of how much of your behavior is is based on your genetics and your DNA, and how, and then,
And here I would add not
nurture.
just genetics, I would also add on top of the genetics, you being able to tap into a shared collective unconscious. But yes.
I don't have an answer for that one. I don't think that geneticists and behavioral scientists have come up with good answers for that, and I'm definitely not an expert in either of those fields, so I'm not sure. A lot of times in those sorts of cases, we only have to worry about the fact that we have this subjective experience, especially if you're looking for the kind of like mystical experience that like ecstatic Kabbalah or Hermeticism is promising you. You aren't always interested in the physical or biological or cultural origin of these things as much as you are the subjective experience, followed by like the responsibility that comes with having that subjective experience.
So we have a comment from Aman Sadhu, who may be joining us a bit later, who says, I believe that colors are consistent with music. So if there is something like synesthesia, when we're talking about people associating certain musical tones with certain colors, then that's already like, you could convince someone 2 + 2 = 5 till the cows come home, but they're still going to be seeing a certain sight relative to the kind of musical notes that they're hearing. So that would be then something that would be based in the reality. So then how is that different than me reacting to the way that my emotions are and seeing these colors? Why is that not the same as reacting to the music?
Well, I don't want to shock you too much, but your experience of music is also culturally is also cultural, and in fact, this is something that's incredibly well documented. You don't have to look back too far before you find like different scales and notes and modes and different ways that notes are split up. I have right here a 7-stringed lyre, lira, which I'm not going to play for you right now. But when I first got it, I looked up some papers by, I don't know, it was some mathematicians or something who were like, oh, here's how Pythagorean mode works. You can tune your lira based on how Pythagoras would have tuned his. And I was like, oh, this sounds great. So I tuned it that way, and I could not stand the way it sounded. Like, it's supposed to be an open tuning, like you can just strum it, and it's supposed to have this, the harmony of the spheres should be drifting out of it, but it does not sound good, at least not to my ear. I was raised in the United States. I listened to the Beatles when I was a kid. Like, my dad loves European classical music, and so we listened to tons of stuff from the 19th century onward. Like, my ear is trained to listen to things in a specific way. If I do have associations between musical notes and colors, first of all, I have associations with those musical notes. Like, I know various chords that sound good to my ear because I've been taught that that's how they should sound. And so, like if middle C is the color pink to me, it's probably because middle C is a very pleasing note to my ear, and I think pink is a pretty color.
Interesting.
Now,
yeah. Go on.
I just wanted to chime in a little bit, and now correct me if I'm wrong, Lev, but I don't think Lev was looking for the materialist answer here. Not to be, okay. I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but I think he was trying to get some, I guess you would call it a metaphysical axiom, get some oh, this is why this happens or something like that beyond the scope of the materialist explanation,
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't know how to answer that question then. I mean, associating music with color.
You would have to experiment.
Yeah, I guess you would have to experiment.
Well, music is vibration. So what I don't get here, I mean, I'm not somebody.
Vibration is material.
Yes, so I guess it wouldn't be exactly right to say I'm looking at it from a totally spiritual perspective here. What I would say, though, is that since we know that music is vibration and color is also vibration, wouldn't certain vibrations be able to resonate with each other a little bit better? That's what I'm basically getting at.
Matter is also vibration.
Yeah, matter is also
super
vibration.
condensed.
So it's like, I think
literally everything is vibration.
like I don't want to go too much into the area that everything is connected, but at the same time, I don't want to go too much in being, you know, like that everything is completely relative. Because in that space, then everything kind of falls apart. Anything that we could grab onto.
Well, nobody's saying.
Well, that's why I'm
Yeah,
saying,
not
like, I
saying
want to.
that either.
That's why I'm saying, like, I want to find the
I,
balance between these two things.
I go the fractal cosmos route, and then I just cram everything into the scope of fractal cosmos, which might sound dumb, but like it's really not. Like even like the idea that all of these interpretations and whatnot, like the reason why they're so similar, but they're so but they're still distinct from one another, which kind of goes back to what Dat was saying. It's a subsect of fractal cosmos that I call Kaleidoscopic Consciousness, because I make up my own shit because I'm weird. I don't know. Which essentially, like, everybody is getting these emanations. Obviously not everybody, but like people who receive emanations as a container of like light or knowledge, which is the same thing. But it's when it interfaces with you, like something is lost when it gets down to into frequency, into substance. So you're gonna get that refraction. There's some of that truth is gonna split off, and like people are gonna have similar ideas that are like half truths without actually having the whole truth, you know. So when it comes to the different colors, it's like, I guess literally it's like people are just refracting different, like for really weird metaphors. Yeah. Yeah.
And we also had a comment over here from Aman Sadhu. And by the way, just so you guys know, Caustic Dreamer and Aman, they are both patrons of Break the Rules and patrons for these kind of conversations. They have a free pass to come in and join us in these conversations. So if you are a patron, or if you become a patron right now and want to be in the Zoom call, I will send you the link and you will get to be in the Zoom call, because that is how much BTR takes care of you, and that's how much we love you. Mad respect. And also $20 patrons get an exquisite print from Giovanni Panaccieri. Limited time offer. It is not going to last. It is going to go away in November. So anyway, guys, don't forget, become patrons. Patreon.com/break the rules with a 3. I'm going to post the link in here. And also, if you want us to get our beak wet, see the links in the bottom. You've been ignoring these links the whole time. Well, no more. Links in the bottom. Streamlabs.com/break the rules and Cointree/break the rules. Help us wet our beak. Support us by going to these links, and either through PayPal or through crypto, Bitcoin or Ethereum with Cointree. Go there, send us some money, write something, and we will shout you out, and we will talk about whatever it is that you write. Anyway, with that being said, Hermes, before we move on to the next subject, do you have anything you would also like to add as far as the colors and any of this stuff, like where the balance is here?
Not so much on the colors. I did have a question about what we've kind of been talking about for like the last 40 or so minutes, in that we're dealing with the problem, I think, of correspondences between these cultures with different histories and traditions and methods for achieving ultimately gnosis. So I'm kind of was interested to find out from either the modern Hermeticist or whomever ultimately is, other than simply losing some of the nuances in each individual tradition, what are some of the pitfalls there of trying to be overly judicious in making these correspondences? And that is, of course, not a loaded or rhetorical. I'm genuinely trying to find out why we want to avoid that problem.
Why do we want to avoid making really hasty one-to-one correspondences across systems?
Yes, and I'm not being sarcastic on that. Just
Yeah.
What is, other than losing nuance, why do we not want to do that?
It depends. I think there's a lot of different. See, my problem is that I approach these things as a historian, so I'm usually trying to understand what other people are thinking, more so than trying to come to a definitive vision myself. I kind of have that for myself, and then on the side, I just want to kind of open up my mind and see what's going on inside of other people's minds. And So historically, if you want to understand people, you got to understand them on their own terms. And so you got to go and you got to read their texts, and you can't bring anything from the outside in. And I think that's just a thing of respect, but it's also a thing of like wanting to see clearly. We wear glasses if we have, you know, impaired vision, because we want to see clearly, and that is in and of itself a good. And I think that really taking our time and being slow and not making quick, hasty correspondences allows us to appreciate different traditions in their own rights, because usually the whole of these systems is more than the sum of their parts. And if we try to make these fast and easy connections, we usually lose some of the details, and usually the best stuff is in the details, or maybe let's say the most profound insights are in the details that arise out of the whole of a given system. So there's that element of you know, wanting to do certain people in the past justice, and then there is also just wanting to have a clarity of vision. But other than that, you know, I don't have any problems for chaos magicians or new agers who want to do whatever it is they want, who do shamanic rituals or use crystals and talismans and summon angels and are Pleiadian starseeds or whatever. All that stuff's good. Just don't call that stuff Lurianic Kabbalah or Hermetic astral magic or whatever, because it muddies the waters, and it stops people who are interested in learning these more isolated traditions from getting an accurate reading. They just get a lot of signal, or they get a lot of noise and not very much signal. And I think that that is kind of my approach to it.
Dreamer Caustic, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. So I do think it's like he pretty much touched on it, but yeah, his intentions for getting into this stuff, like as a historian, are going to be fundamentally different than that of like a practitioner or whatnot. So like while his take is legit, it doesn't always apply to everyone. So like me, I think all the different belief structures and systems should be interfaced with, like they should interface at least for the sake of like learning, for like seeing what happens when you put it together. Like I'm a more praxis, like a more like let's do some experiments type of guy. And I want to see like what I can get results from. So I want as many of these systems interfacing as possible. And I do. And I it's like why I also appeal to the fractal cosmos a lot. Like everything is part of that macrocosm and part of that microcosm, you know, like all of these ideas too, they're like reflections of confabulations on beads of water. Like they're all reaching towards something similar. You just gotta look for it, you know?
Yeah. Jewels in Indra's web, or
Yep.
Aspects of the Ein Sof, or you know, souls that are basking in the intellect. These are all different traditions trying to deal with the same sort of things, but they've all fleshed them out, I think, a little bit different. So you mentioned this thing about practitioners, and I think what's important, a good analogy that I like to use is languages, right? So let's say you speak German, French, and Mandarin, but you mix those three languages together into one language, and you say, yes, this works best for me. And, you know, that might be true, but you're not going to be able to communicate with other Germans, with other Mandarin people, with other French people. You will only speak your own idiosyncratic blend of language. And so it depends what you're after. If you're after an idiosyncratic, individualist kind of magic, that's perfectly fine. But if you're after a tradition that is trying to connect you, give you identity, root you into something that is 1,000 years old, you have to go and play by the rules of that specific language and not just mix them together.
Certainly.
Yeah, and then, or like another analogy I often heard was like people who go to McDonald's at the drink fountain and start mixing together Coke with iced tea, with orange soda, with whatever, and then they go, like, taste this, and the flavor is really strange. So I think that there are many analogies we can use. And again, I'm not doing this from a place of judgment or whatever. It's just from what I see, the people who are rooted into specific traditions, they often, the power of their ritual, of their
because they're working with egregores and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's different.
There's this like intersubjective bootstrapping that's going on, or scaffolding between minds. And I think that really is an important thing when it comes to specific traditions.
Okay, so I have sort of a follow-up question in that. So we have separate traditions, separate cultures, and I again, I absolutely do acknowledge the importance of taking a thing in its own right and setting. Now, do we think that gnosis, like capital G gnosis, is different for different traditions and different cultures, or as a person progresses down through their path, is the gnosis, the sort of ultimate gnosis, if one can achieve it, the same for everyone and anyone who can't do it, or are these entirely different gnoses?
Right.
I think that there are. Oh,
sorry. Go on, Eric.
I was going to say, I used to think that they were all the same, but I don't anymore. Primarily because I've talked to people of traditions that were not the same as mine, who have described spiritual goals that have either been reached or have had descriptions of spiritual goals that were completely different than what I was expecting, or things that I had experienced. And even when you look at stuff like, the capital G gnosis, like, are you talking about what Christian Gnostics were after? Are you talking about like the weird ascension that happens in like book 13 of the Corpus Hermeticum? Are you talking about the experience of ascending spheres? Like, I think that a lot of them probably describe different states of consciousness, and I suspect that there are a lot of similarities, but I don't necessarily think that every tradition is describing the same thing or after the same state of mind. I'm not even sure that like enlightenment means the same thing across traditions.
Yeah, I agree with this. If you ask a Buddhist what the gnosis is, versus even within Buddhism, ask a Pure Land Buddhist versus a different kind of Buddhist what the gnosis is, or if there is salvific knowledge, or if really it's all just emptiness, or some sort of godhood, or there are many different. If you ask the people what the gnosis is, often they'll use some sort of esoteric veil and say something to try to abscond from the question, which is what you should do. But I think there are very many different gnoses, and what I usually think of these as is higher faculties. These are the awakening of higher faculties. So there are many different higher faculties, and often we experience one of them and we think, I've seen the face of God or something like that. And it's like, no, actually you have many of these potential higher faculties, which you can engage in spiritual practice. And that is essentially various religious traditions have different higher faculties that they are trying to get to. Some people in the Renaissance Christian tradition, what they're after is called felicitas, and it is above gnosis. Gnosis is the scientific knowledge that the astral magicians tried to saturate their intellects, so that they knew everything there was to know. And once they knew everything there was to know, they came in contact with their perfect nature, their daimon. And then they could engage in these conversations with this spiritual entity that is essentially their higher selves. But that's not the same as Felicitas, which is the highest goal of the Christian sage, which they would argue goes above and beyond nature into the super celestial angelic realm, as described by Pseudo Dionysius the Areopagite. And I think that that tradition is really a different kind of gnosis because it is an unknowing. It is all about apophatic knowledge. It is about veiling in many, many veils of apophasis that which you do not know and do not understand and can have no reckoning of. And that to me is anti-Gnostic in the purest sense. It is saying, like, whatever it is kind of knowledge you have, God is higher than that. There is a higher something that dwells outside of knowledge, outside of the intellect, no matter what. And I think that when you get into those details, you start to realize, holy smokes, Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, Gnostics, all these and different subsects therein all have these different teleologically ordained goals that they're trying to work toward. And I used to think that they were all one, but the more I realize it, the more I think of these as just being higher faculties that lead toward I don't know what you would call it, unity consciousness or something like that.
Yakida.
But isn't that the same thing as saying that they're all one? Maybe not. They're not in the exact place that you think they are, but they are all still leading to the same place. Would that be fair to say?
So, yeah, and then here we get into the Sephiroth, right? So the idea is that that the light of God is one. There is one light, but there are 10 or however many apertures, vistas, windows with different tints, the different colors, to get on this subject again. And the light passes through these different colors, be that strength or victory or beauty or glory or wisdom or what have you. And we experience the one through these vistas, but ultimately we are experiencing one thing.
I mean, it makes sense in an intellectual level, but go on.
Well, I'll let you respond to him, and then I want to answer Hermes' question as well.
Okay, well, I was going to ask if Aman Sadhu, who, again, for those who don't know, Aman is a great patron of ours, has been a patron for a very long time. Aman, I don't mean to call on you if you don't have a question ready, but just in case, just if you may be shy or whatever, do you have anything you want to ask? And we do not hear Aman, so we will work on that. We will get to Aman eventually. But anyway, Caustic Dreamer, go for it.
So the big thing I've seen, and there's variations of these dynamics, but they're relatively consistent, is that on one hand, you have people who are trying to abstain or secede from substance, from human experience. Like Christians, it's all about similarly to Buddhists, like Christianity is focused on not engaging or interfacing with the vices of substance or the sinfulness of the material world. It's like and then there's the other hand, where now I know this is like a left-hand path type thing, but Thomas Carlson wrote about how the other approach is, like, I guess you would call it like a type of apotheosis or something, by taking what's there and just deep diving, like going all the way through to the other side, like with knowledge and whatnot, instead of trying to abstain from it or from experience, to experience it and then go beyond it, like to transcend the weakness of substance, so to speak. Like you're just not affected by it anymore. And to I would so like Christians will try to rejoin the Godhead, like they've got their umbilical cord, so to speak, and they want to be like sucked back into the womb, metaphorically speaking here, where left-hand paths, they want that umbilical cord to be cut, and they want to actually manifest in the image of God or whatever to its fullest extent, and become, like through apotheosis, like maturate into a God themselves. That's like the two distinct approaches that I see, with variations in how it's expressed through various cultures. But like those are the general ideas.
Yes.
I was just saying, I've heard that that left-hand path thing explained a few different ways, and the way you just described it there, I've heard once or twice, and it doesn't make any sense to me from the point of view of a mystic or any mystic tradition that I've come across historically. But the other way I've heard the left-hand path thing explained corresponds pretty closely to a lot of sort of the idea of, achieving sainthood or developing your, I don't know, astral body or whatever, like what apparently happens to Hermes Trismegistus after he ascends, where he comes back. He's like, hey, I'm like a magic ghost now. I'm going to teach you guys how to do all sorts of mystical things.
Now, that's kind of like the Buddha, what you're describing there.
Yeah. I think I've heard it referred to as like the diamond body or rainbow body or something like that in Buddhism. But that other thing, the severing of the self from
I just say severing the umbilical cord from God, like just to make a more easily understood metaphor.
Yeah, I've heard that kind of metaphor described usually by people who are talking about the Kellypot stuff from one of those left-hand path books, and it mostly sounds to me like somebody who just doesn't get Kabbalah at all.
Well, it's New Age. Like it's fundamentally
New Age.
So
I don't really understand
that
the idea behind it.
So New Age people, and like I'm New Age, obviously. So it would be dishonest for me to try and say anything else. In response to like the epistemic crisis, like a lot of New Age is just trying to figure out how to interpret it without necessarily like appealing to consensus or appealing to how other people have tried to figure it out before. Like it's almost like a re-exploration of a field of science. And we're not saying like you guys are wrong, we're right. It's like it's more of a, well, we're gonna try this way and see if it works type thing. Mm-hmm. It's not a diss, it's just we're doing our own thing.
So does it work?
I mean, I'm only an adept. I obviously have not become a godhead. So I mean, we're halfway there. We're living on a prayer. What I've been able to do, and like I can access the Kundalini. Like I did it on accident. So like, it's funny, like my experiences with the supernatural preceded my knowledge of it. So it's like an interesting situation. So my experience is like, I can interface with it. I'm able to figure stuff out. And I'm still,
what do you mean in that sense?
Clarify. Cause I did say a lot there.
Well, you were saying you can interface with it. Oh, you were talking about the Kundalini.
Yeah. So like, basically like at some point in high school, like I had a bombardment of ego deaths. And then I just started feeling the electricity going up my spine. And I was just like, oh, what the fuck is this? Am I schizophrenic? And then over time, I started reading books and like just digging into stuff. And I started like trying to make sense of it. And I'm at where I'm at now, basically.
Okay.
So I have a thought on this. And what I think is that the path to godhood thing, I find strange because often it is conceived of in opposition or reaction to Christianity. But, from my research, from looking at guys like Marsilio Ficino talking about Christianity, he is very emphatic that human beings are souls made in the image of the divine, and therefore humans are divine fragments. We are already little gods, and we just have to wake up and acknowledge it. And so the idea is that Christ is the exemplary man and the ideal form of the man. You participate in his essences and you realize your own divinity as this fragment of the divine. And it's really kind of essential to his metaphysic is that you go up to the throne room and you be one of these saints or blesseds or beatific lights, sort of like in Dante's Paradiso, where they transcend above the heavens and return to the spheres of the angels, and they're in these choir rooms in eternal peace and bliss. And I feel like the Luciferian or satanic impulse is born out of Gnosticism, in that it is, I want to break out of this system entirely, and I want to be the God in the middle of the throne room. But the question is, like, when you are experiencing absolute unity, what is the difference between you being the God or you being some divine fragment in recognition of the unity? So it kind of, and then, you know, we get into questions of Averroes and the agent intellect and kind of melding into one another. Do we all become one thing, or are we individuated souls that are immortal? Platonism, sure, thinks so, but there are different traditions at work between Platonism and tantric, esoteric Buddhism and things like that.
There was one thing I wanted to bring up, what I saw one day when I looked at the mirror, and I know it's going to sound a little bit weird, but I think it's related to what you're talking about, where the nipples are like the eyes, and the heart is like the third eye. It's like a reflection. The nose is like the diaphragm, especially my diaphragm, because it gets really big from all the Wim Hof Method work, and the mouth is like the stomach. I see our face as being a fractal representation in a more maybe complex way of what's going on with our body. And I also see, like I talked before, about us being a 5-pointed star, except for the dick, which is the 6th point, which is the idea of materiality. Now, again, I may be going on tangents here, but I do see us, human beings, as spiritual vessels where when people give examples of extraterrestrials, they like draw, I don't know, like little green men, or like have the, you know, with the antennas and all that. I think that if there are other people, you know, in other planets, they'd look very similar to us. Like, if there were, let's say, maybe they're taller than us, maybe they're stronger than us. Like, if you look at, for example, the bones of the, what would we call it, the Neanderthals. No, not the Neanderthals, the other ones. Who am I thinking of, right? Cro-Magnons, that's it. If you look at the Cro-Magnon skull, you know, they're very powerful, and I think they may have been very beautiful as well. So this form that we have over here, I think that there is something very special about it. We've kind of touched on it before the podcast started, as far as what I may suspect is going on here with us and animals. But suffice it to say, I think this is a very special form that we're in, which is a representation of something higher. And the one thing, though, that I would also add into this, I'm curious what you guys think, is the representations that Christians have had of angels, which is very different from the cherubim-type angels that you get in the Renaissance. We're talking about these DMT-like floating eyeball things, so, you know, with wings. So what do you think is happening there?
That's old. That's from the Bible, like old Bible, pre-Christian stuff.
Ezekiel, yeah.
Yeah, Ezekiel. He was the one who had the weird chariot wheel angel vision thing. I'm not sure what he was smoking.
One with all the animals.
Yeah, the animals.
The cherubic animal thingamajigs. Those, yeah, I love those ones. This is an aside, but I was at the years ago, I was in Belgium on a road trip through the countryside, and I was with this buddy of mine, a Dutch guy who's this incredible artist, and he's like, "Oh, there's this castle you have to see." And it's the castle, or the Tower of Aben Ezer, or Aben Aden, something like that. And the whole thing was made with like these found rocks, like these weird little geodes that he'd found all over the property. And he'd made it into this enormous 4-story castle, or 4-story tower. And at the top were these huge cherubic angels that were kind of looking out over the countryside. Very strange looking, totally worth looking up on the internet. I think it's Aben Aden.
I am going to look that up right now. And okay. And Aman Sadhu, I think your sound finally is able to work. I don't know if you have...
Yes, hello?
Hello, Aman, welcome.
Howdy.
Our great patron, Aman Sadhu.
I do have sugars.
Shiver?
But
No, you
no,
sound good.
it's a bath joke. I'm
Oh,
joking.
okay.
I don't have anything to add right now.
Okay,
Thank you, though.
that's fine. But thank you very much for being a patron. I really appreciate you coming in here. So another topic that I wanted to get into, and this may be kind of like the I don't know if this is the end topic, but it's something that I've been interested in getting your take on. There is a friend of mine, Drew Arnold, who we had on for a previous show. He is in co-masonry, so that's like a Freemasonry, but it's like both men and women are in there, and he's very much been into a lot of the different mystery schools. One of the things that he really wants to eventually write a book on is the sigils that are active in the architecture of Washington, D.C. And we have had letters going back to the Founding Fathers talking about, like not the Founding Fathers, but like the people who were in charge of the design, who were part of that whole thing. Like they were talking about something significant. I remember what, having to do with the way they designed DC. And again, I don't want to go in the whole tinfoil hatted mode over here, but when you're looking in Washington, DC, oh, there we go. That is, look at that. I'm going to take a bigger screen. Here we go. That is really beautiful. So when you're looking in Washington, D.C., and you are seeing all these geometric patterns, do you attribute, and I'm not going to go right now in the whole, New World Order, yada, 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 but do you attribute there being a certain special quality to sigils in that grand scheme of, having something that covers many, many blocks? Like if you're going to devote time to creating geometric shapes that will cover those many blocks, what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Is it just fancy? Is it just somebody playing a giant joke, or is there something significant in this kind of construction?
Well, it's classic principles of architecture being applied. That, a city like Washington, D.C., there is an attempt to mimic, in many ways, Roman architecture, and by extension, Italian Renaissance architecture. And the guys in the Italian Renaissance loved their Pythagoras. They loved Plato. They loved these perfect ratios and getting everything to line up perfectly and having strange forms emerge from these patterns. And so they did that kind of stuff. City planners, if you are allowed to start from scratch, they did that. You can find all kinds of cities in Europe that were built on a plan rather than built haphazardly, and they often have these kind of Platonic sigil-like qualities to them. And I think that the main, I don't think that this is to summon demons or anything, but I do think that things that are balanced and proportionate, things that are beautiful, are treated better. They mess with your eyes in a positive way, and they make you want to be around that thing, desire that thing, make that thing, make more of that beautiful thing. And so if you're smart, you make your cities beautiful and people will treat them nicely. And I think that that's part of it.
See, that's
yeah, it only got burned down like once.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, and I'm not opposed to that. The only thing that I would add is if we are taking a look at, like, let's see, the main Masonic building in D.C., that they do have rituals having to do with, the resurrection of Osiris and all that. And I've always been interested, how much is it for play? How much is it for just a reinvigorating of the people who are a member of your club in order to just have some fun? And while I'm not saying, any summoning of demons, oh, and Baji says, I open the BTR stream and first thing I hear is summoning demons. Oh boy. Yes. It's like, I'm not even there. By the way, let's just take a step back for a second. When we're talking about demons, let's reference Patrick Harper's Daimonic Reality for a second, okay? Because it's not demons like, like these horned entities, like, no. When I'm saying demon, I'm saying daimon. I'm saying like the jinn in Islam. I'm saying like the fairies and sprites that you would find like Scotland and Ireland, as well as godlike, 6 foot tall, beautiful figures that they would see, not just like little pixies. So what I'm saying is entities like were sort of discussed in the beginning of the show that people would end up meeting either in an inebriated state that we could say, like, sure, certain things are subjective, but if the same people, the same culture keeps meeting certain entities over and over and over again, as well as these entities overlapping into different cultures, then there could be something going on here, as well as the Bon religion and the various entities from there that then got transferred into Tibetan Buddhism, where the pictures themselves, again, I heard from my friend that these pictures were never really meant for the eyes of people who didn't really know what they were, if we're talking about all the Thangka paintings that were made of all these gods. And when you look upon these, you are supposed to get into the state of being able to actually see those gods, kind of preparing you for the moment that you meet them. And I would even say that the symbols that we would have of, like, the yantras, for example. So we have Kali. Kali has her yantra. Shiva has a yantra. These yantras are even pre-preparatory steps before you're even allowed to see the forms that these gods take. So either you have people wasting a whole bunch of time talking about nonsense, or what you have is actual beings that people are able to actually meet and interface with. In which case, when we're talking about these rituals that the Masons, let's say, are doing with the resurrection of Osiris, there may be a tangible thing, a project that they want to do, going back to the United States, going back even further to, let's say, John Dee, for instance. We didn't even get to him yet, and the Enochian magic. That there may be, and I'm still a neophyte when it comes to this, some point where we could say, or maybe not say, this is up to you guys, whatever you guys think here, but would there be a point where we could say, we can actually stretch this beyond saying, oh, this looks nice, this looks beautiful. There's actually a function these things are doing, whether it's DC or whether it's any other kind of large-scale construction. And that's the thing that I'm very interested in finding out here. So I know modern... Yes.
Oh, I think we can. The shape of the room you're in, the shape of the building, changes the man inside significantly. Even if you're summoning the demon, if you're thinking of it as, pardon me, as changing the behavior or the mindset, you can test this yourself in different places. You'll feel differently. You'll do work differently. Many people who I've worked with, they've felt the same thing. So I think it's real. It's just less outside of yourself and more as a part of yourself. And the way you design it will change the people. How much? I'm not sure. I think rituals might be able to charge the effect, but it's up in the air. Who knows?
What do you guys think?
So I'm thinking of this as it pertains to Hermeticism, but chiefly talismanic magic. And when it comes to talismanic magic, what you're chiefly doing is creating objects that are pleasing to spirits, or daimones, as you were describing, these kind of interdimensional beings. There are certain things in this material world that, when aggregated together, whether they be shapes, special characters that are a specific language that spirit knows, typically they're attracted by scents. So you scent buildings with incenses and things like that. They are attracted by various rituals and combinations of things. And a big part of Hermetic astral magic is this tradition of harnessing these spirits and drawing them down into your spaces and making them do stuff for you. And so I think it's not crazy to extend this idea of talismanic magic, of creating talismans, of doing rituals using various substances, and comparing that to architecture, making buildings, or just art in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something about art in general that causes the brain to cogitate and causes those spirits to move around in the noosphere. And so I think, yeah, you could make an argument that there is something talismanic about building, but I don't know, unless you were to, know for a fact that a given architect practiced Pythagorean or some sort of purity ritual tradition. I wouldn't say that necessarily that they're tapping into that and not more general concepts like Vitruvius's architecture. But yeah, I'm sure there are some places that that have been designed as talismanic buildings or talismanic spaces. Certainly, the Hall of Months at the Palace of Schifanoia in Ferrara, it was a giant talismanic room surrounded with the images of the deckhands that were drawn from the Picatrix. And these were wealthy Ferrarese nobles that would walk through these courts, and they wore jeweled encrusted clothing and jewelry in order that they themselves be part of this living talismanic lifestyle. So
where is this hall? I would love to post a picture of it.
So in Ferrara, look up the Hall of Months, Ferrara, and you'll see frescoes that are really like trippy, weird art. And that's because they are stellar daimons from ancient Egypt that were transferred through, centuries. And eventually they were recovered in the Renaissance from the Picatrix and drawn by these Renaissance artists. And so the room is kind of like a clock, right? So there are 36 deckhands. They each take up a 10 degree chunk of the sky. So you can basically decorate a room all around with these 36 daimons. And did you find an image?
Is this an example of the daimons? This is one of the images that I found in the Ferrara Hall. There are other ones as well. And by the way, yes. And here is another image of the palace, which I'm going to post. And by the way, for those who are watching, please don't forget to subscribe again. Whenever there are any gaps, I always say, please subscribe, please subscribe, please subscribe. Here is the second image. So this would be the image of the hall, correct?
Yes.
That is a really
I want to go there.
place.
Where's that at?
It's in Ferrara in Italy.
Okay.
Ferrara.
Well, I'll put it on the list.
Yeah.
I've not gone there, but holy moly, do I want to go.
That's also a very sexy name for an Italian gal, right? Ferrara. I'd like to date a girl named Ferrara. Anyway, by the way, we have over here, so this is the Washington, D.C. that I was talking about earlier. Now, obviously, it's a bit crudely drawn on the bottom, but this is a shape that you could just look at the way that the roads are. Not really a shape you would see in the Vatican, although I understand how they are associated. But this is a 5-pointed sigil, so...
I do have something to say about this. Okay, so I guess as a disclaimer, I've been a Freemason for 20 years. So I've written and published a lot about Freemasonry. I'm well known amongst Masons as being a very weird, esoteric Mason. And every time I look at this picture, I always think that if it was a Mason who did this and they did it on purpose, they did such a shitty job. Am I allowed to swear on this channel?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go for it.
They did such a shitty job. That pentagram is horrible. Like it's all off. It's all wonky. The square encompasses thing with the little weird ass head on it over on the side, like it's off center. None of the angles match what Freemasonry teaches. That pentagram doesn't have a single golden proportion in it. Like it is so poorly done that if a Freemason did it, it is probably our most embarrassing conspiracy theory, almost as embarrassing as the Illuminati.
Interesting. Well, now that
a Mason would say this.
A Mason would say this. Well, actually, now that we have
get out your protractor and measure it yourself.
Now that we have a Freemason here, I want to ask you about this Tubal Cain image over here, which is a Masonic pin. This does bear a lot of resemblance, let's face it, to the Facebook logo. It's even got those little, the likes on the hands. So Tubal Cain.
It's kind of weird, isn't it?
It is. Well, Tubal Cain,
yeah.
It's kind of a joke where it's like two balls and a cane, Tubal Cain. But Tubal Cain is also a very prominent character in the Bible. He was like one of the first builders, one of the first technology-oriented people. So that's a very interesting thing for me, as well as the Masonic apron. So with the Masonic apron, you have the Gmail logo. It's pretty much the Gmail logo. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it anymore. It's the
hold on.
logo.
That conspiracy goes deeper.
Okay.
Think about what an envelope looks like. All right, you know what an envelope looks like in real life.
Yes.
Who was our first Postmaster General?
Who?
It was Benjamin Franklin, probably the most prominent American Freemason. Benjamin Franklin published the first Masonic book in the or not in the United States because it was the 1730s, but the first Masonic book on this side of the Atlantic. Do you think perhaps he designed the envelopes so that it would look like a Masonic apron? No, he did not, because back then Masonic aprons looked way different. But maybe Freemasons redesigned their aprons to look like Benjamin Franklin's envelopes.
Well, we can look at the envelopes, but even more importantly, the actual red design of these things, that is the logo of Gmail.
Oh yeah, that red apron would not be used in an American lodge. In American lodges, if you did have an apron like that, it would be blue.
Interesting. So who uses the red aprons?
Red aprons are used by Royal Arch Freemasonry in the United States, but they don't have a G and a square and compass in the middle. Actually, I believe right behind me, I might have an apron. You can just Google it though.
Wait, you're a Freemason?
Yeah, I've been a Freemason. Yeah, my 20th anniversary is coming up at the end of November, actually.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Well, here is
what degree?
I have well, I mean, I'm a Master Mason. I've been High Priest of a Royal Arch chapter 3 times, and I've been Master of a Lodge 3 times. I have a 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite. I've taken a bunch of degrees in the York Rite. I mean, I've been doing it for ages. I've done lots and lots of stuff.
Do Masons build things with wood?
With wood?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we're a fraternal organization who uses the symbols of stone builders, but very few of us actually do it. I do have a friend who's a construction worker, though, as a Freemason.
Very disappointing.
Yeah, it's medieval guild imagery that they're borrowing. And actually, like, most confraternities are tapping into medieval guilds. Like, before capitalism, that was one of the main modes for men to organize themselves, was religious confraternities, or colleges as they were called.
And yeah, for sure.
So you're like, yeah, Masonry just is totally tapping into that.
That picture that you just posted with the guy wearing the red apron, that is probably South American.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to the envelope thing, we've discussed that. As far as the image that I posted earlier, this two-ball cane image, this one I'm the most curious about, just because it's such an odd-looking thing. Like, what
I can talk about that a little bit. So I think I first saw somebody wearing one of these pins. I mean, first of all, it's a visual pun, and it's a pretty old one. And you'll find like Masonic canes going back to probably like the 1800s that are basically like canes with 2 balls hanging from them, or 2 balls attached to them, or something. And I first saw this pin, I want to say, I mean, I'm sure they've been around for a long time, but I think I first saw this pin after I saw the Facebook logo, and I remember seeing it and immediately thinking that it looked like the Facebook logo and laughing at it. Because when you're up close, it doesn't look like the Facebook logo that much, but most people wear them as like really tiny lapel pins. So when you're standing a little ways back, it looks like they're wearing the Facebook logo. I do know that, a lot of Facebook users are boomers, and so are a lot of Freemasons. So all of your old uncles who are Freemasons are probably on Facebook right now sharing their conspiracy theories with each other.
Well, actually, speaking of that, we finally have, I am so happy to announce, we have Andrew Meyer with us, AKA, I'm sure you guys have seen the video with Don't Tase Me Bro. So Andrew Meyer, the original Don't Tase Me Bro. Welcome, Andrew. So glad to have you with us.
How's it going, Liv?
It's going great. So I wanted to ask you a bit about the Kabbalah, but at the same time, we also have, as I found out, Reverend Eric, he is in Freemasonry. So I want to see what actually makes sense without saying things that like are not substantiated. If you ever wanted to ask any question to a Freemason regarding like Washington, D.C., and any of these kind of influences, like digging as deep as you want to, this I think would be a great opportunity if you do have any questions you wanted to ask regarding any of that stuff.
No, I don't have any questions about it.
Okay, then skipping on ahead, let's go to the Kabbalah. So can you talk a little bit about your take on the Kabbalah as well as the connection to Jesus, which I was not as aware of before you mentioned it to me?
So Kabbalah is basically how to receive, what are we even doing in this world? Why are we here? The first time I really had those questions answered for me in any kind of substantial way was a book called The Power of Kabbalah by Yehuda Berg. Really, anybody that just wants to understand what's going on in this world and why we're here, Kabbalah literally means how to receive, because all we're doing here is receiving the light of God and figuring out how to do that in the best way. As far as the connection to Jesus, I totally recommend people check out the class by Billy Phillips called Unredacting Jesus. If you look at the words of Jesus, he says over and over again that those who have ears to hear, let them hear. He's letting you know that there's a secret teaching. And if you look at lots of Christian scholars, they'll tell you there's a secret teaching of Jesus. And basically, when you get to the depths of Christianity, you find a lot of the same stuff that's in the deepest places in Judaism, which is Kabbalah. And a lot of it's in the Zohar. You can just go read the Zohar, zohar.com. But a lot of what's in the Zohar, you need help understanding it because a lot of it is very coded. It's been decoded by the Ari, and then the Ari was decoded by a guy named Yehuda Ashlag. So to really understand Kabbalah, it's helpful to have teachers. So I'm just pointing the way to, if people want to find out the light of God and find the deepest wisdom of Jesus and anything else, I'm just pointing the way to the real teachers.
Well, I definitely appreciate you doing that. And we were talking before about a lot of the differences in these various systems as well as a lot of the similarities. As far as the Kabbalah goes, is there anything Cossack Dreamer or Hermes or Aman that you would want to ask Andrew as far as how the system works?
Well, you intimated that there's a connection between Christ and the Kabbalah. I'd be interested to hear you expound on that just a little bit. That's would be new knowledge for me.
So I say to a lot of people, really, if you look into Christianity, Christianity and Judaism, they're like in a way one and the same in different ways. Like in Christianity, people go get a baptism. In Judaism, we call it a mikvah. It's a ritual cleansing that you do in water. And we don't just do it once, we do it all the time. And there's a lot of similarities, not just little things like that, but big things. If you talk about, I talked to E. Michael Jones about this, and he didn't seem to know what I was talking about. But there's a papal cross, the Pope's cross. It's got 3 bars, not just one. And if you look at that cross, it lines up perfectly with the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is the 10 Sephiroth, the 10 dimensions of reality. And even quantum physics, like Michio Kaku, who's a quantum physicist, he was astounded to find out that in the text of the Zohar, they describe these 10 dimensions of realities. This is a 2,000-year-old book, and they only just learned about this in quantum physics recently. So, those 10 dimensions, that's the Kabbalistic tree of life. It's also the Pope's cross. It's embedded in Christianity, the real information about, the deepest study of the Bible, of, Kabbalah. And, if you go in churches all over Europe, they'll have the name of God the Father in Hebrew. Why do they have a Hebrew name of God on Christian churches where they weren't learning Hebrew, they weren't using Hebrew? Why do they still have the Hebrew name of God? Because there's power in those letters. I'm trying to boil down, this is decades long study, like to really learn this stuff. And I'm trying to boil it down to little bits and pieces so people could just understand what's going on there.
It's quite something, Andrew. I mean, I'm just getting started learning all this, and I know that there has been a divide after well, long after Yehuda Ashlag, if we're talking about who got the teaching. So on one hand, you have Rav Berg, as you mentioned. On the other hand, you have Michael Lightman. And I know you're not that much of a fan of Lightman. Since he speaks Russian, I was able to listen in a lot of the, let's say, intonations you otherwise wouldn't get, that me as a Russian, I kind of like immediately understood certain things that he was saying because of that. But from what I understand, there is a lot of similarity in the two, as far as he's also talking about converting egoism into altruism. What would you say would be either a deception or something that, I don't know, would lead people astray if they were to, let's say, join up more on the Lightman side as opposed to the Rav Berg side of things?
I don't really want to shade the guy at all. You know, you can study him. I find that people that really get into him are people that are very in love with the intellect. You know, if you're in love with the intellect, I find that people with that kind of nature gravitate towards him, and, you know, be well and do as you like. But I find that people that really want a true connection, they want to get a real connection to the light. They just want to, you know, they're not interested in ego. They're not interested in just the intellect. They're interested in really, you know, doing the right thing in the world. They find their way toward the Rav and the students of the Rav. So, you know, I don't want to
No, that's
shade
fair.
the guy.
That's
you know.
But when it comes to, let's say, not these two branches, but the actual like Hasidic Jews, if we're talking, for example, about like I don't know, the Chabadniks, the Chabad Lubavitch movement. I've spoken to some of them, and they don't like the fact that a lot of this knowledge is being like brought out into, you know, to the Gentiles, to the world. Like, do you think that there's going to be any kind of reconciliation there?
Eventually, yeah. I think they will be a lot of them will be some of the last people to, you know, reconcile, because here's the thing. I used to give out Zohars door to door. The Zohar is literally the Holy Grail. You go to door with the Zohar, you go to a very, very rich neighborhood, they're not interested. They're rich, they're wealthy. What could you be offering them? They're rich and wealthy. So they're not so interested in something of a spiritual light. When you go to places like Chabad, you know, a lot of times the people there, they have a spiritual connection. They've got what they've got. They're not necessarily interested more. They think they've got it all. So, you know, what can you tell them?
But is there anything missing though from what they got? Because hasn't that been the same knowledge that's been passed down from rabbi to rabbi in in a continuous path?
Well, you said it. You said it, not me. If they were doing everything perfectly, I think we'd have world peace, because there's enough Chabadniks in the world that if they were doing it perfectly, we should have Mashiach by now, Messiah. So, you know, they're not all uniform. They're not all the same. You know, I've met some Chabad teachers that I think are very impressive people. You know, I would still recommend, obviously, my teachers over going to them, but you could go listen to a lecture, and there's interesting stuff there. There's some light. And then there's some people that, you know, I don't even necessarily would want to spend a Shabbat with them. So, you know, it's a very mixed bag. There's a lot of people. It's like, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So, you know, you're not going to get all the same thing from, just the brand.
No, that's true. Even like within the Jewish community, like people think of it as like some fucking monolith. Meanwhile, some of the people who some of the people who hate certain sects of Jews the most are other sects of Jews. Like they go into street fights when it comes to arguing about certain passages in the Torah. You know, like my rabbi is correct about this. You know, yours is a fool or whatever. And you could even see that in the what do you call it? In the Talmud, where you would have one passage talking about how if the goy reads the Torah, then they should be sentenced to execution. While another rabbi right below that writes, no, if a goy reads the Torah, that means they are a holy man and should be respected. So they can't even agree on basic things when it comes to life and death things. Yet you have like the KKK taking that one passage and putting into these are the things that Jews don't want you to know. Letters that are spread around the internet.
Can I drop in for a second here?
Sure.
When you mentioned world peace earlier, you know, there's something about world peace which is kind of ignored sometimes. World peace means everyone is under the same dominating force. So it's not necessarily a good thing. I wouldn't want a world peace under something that's not mine. And I don't think this different sects of this thing would want that either. You want the ownership. You don't want to have sort of you being a subject.
I'm not talking about Chinese communist world peace where there's peace because they made you have peace. I'm talking about world peace because people are enlightened.
No, see, but to be enlightened it's still a form of subjection. You're still dominated by something. There's a different way.
By God, by choice.
Yes, but earlier in the stream too, they talked about different tints, different sort of paths or faculties.
Different types of enlightenment.
Yeah, all going to the same place. I disagree. I think they're all supposed to have conflict. I think there's supposed to be battle, glorious battle, excitement, fire, vitality. This is good. This is what we live for. Without that, what do I live for?
Well, I mean, there is the Revelation stuff talking about like the armies of the world, coming up against each other.
So I think we're talking about two different worldviews here, where we have the cyclical worldview of good times make strong men make good times, and so on and so forth, and then we're talking about more of the end of history-ish worldview when it comes to the revealed religion from the Abrahamic perspective. When we have, Judaism, then Christianity, then Islam, the difference between those religions and the ones that came before is before they were in a state of perennialism, the cycles of history, and the various yugas, where all the people who were living just saw life as being timeless, kind of like. And in a way, you could say that God is timeless, but they saw their existence as timeless as opposed to heading into a certain direction where a certain thing would happen. Andrew, am I saying it correctly that in your version of things, there would be a culmination that would result in something that would forever alter our perception of reality?
Yeah, I mean, just look at the last few years. It's undeniable that people's awareness and understanding of how the world works, even just on this physical level, is completely expanded. And then once you get to the idea of the spiritual realm, you're seeing people like Mike Cernovich tweet out stuff like, it's undeniable that God is real, and you're seeing the hand of Satan. Like, it's becoming like very obvious to people that are aware that God and the devil are real forces in the world. So I'm just talking about, like you say, an expanded consciousness where it just is that there's more consciousness in the world, and that's the state of Mashiach, the higher consciousness. Not some political body forcing you to do anything.
If I could meet somewhere
on a higher level.
If I could meet somewhere in the middle, which I know is really weird because we are talking about two different worldviews here, I think it is possible to reconcile them. Although it may take something away from more of this kind of ultimate end idea. The way I would reconcile these two is to say that the yugas do exist, but there are cycles within these cycles, and the cycle we may be heading to right now would be the deepest part of the Kali Yuga, out of which would enter into the Satya Yuga. Satya means truth, where people would not really be able to hide something in their minds. Everybody would be totally open, be able to understand each other as being a fragment of one universal consciousness. And that, I think, would be a mentality that people would have had in previous cycles of the Satya Yuga. That's at least what the Satya Yuga is like to me. So would it be possible for us to see that as being a potential here, as opposed to like an ultimate end of everything, but it would also be just like going into another golden age, perhaps?
I mean, that's possible. That's not really the goal, though. Like, we've been doing dances for a long time, humanity that is, of escalating and then the cycle not working out and this and that. But we want to reach that ultimate point. That point means the end of pain, suffering, and death. And even in the mainstream science journals, they're talking about literal immortality technology where they can repair you at the cellular level using nano robots and whatever. It just means that, our consciousness has reached such a level that, we're not inflicting pain. Death is a choice. Like, to be closer to God, to be almost like God. That's humanity's future.
But see, I see
But
these
how
paths as
soon?
being so different, though. Like what you said right now, I was almost with you, except when you were talking about these various techniques to extend life, which I could see the positivity of that. But what I'm talking about is not that. What I'm talking about is basically like the blowing out of the candle, the ceasing of the difference between me and you and me and this computer screen and this camera and this food that I haven't eaten yet, where these are all the same things and it is recognized as the same thing. That is what I'm talking about more.
That's an understanding that you can have now. I mean, everything
Return
in this
to
universe
primordial
came
soup.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
everything
Brahma's
came
breath
from
being
from one
indrawn.
place, but
Can I
everything came from one place. But that doesn't make me the same as this steering wheel or that tree. We are the same but different.
Yes.
Just
yes.
If we're all one body, like we're all literally one body of humanity, but there's still the hand, there's still the foot, there's still the eyes. So we can all be one, but still be different and unique.
There's something
yes.
to understand, though, about when you say Kali Yuga or Dark Age or whatever. Why is the time now being considered this way? It's not that there's more conflict, there's less conflict. There's less interpersonal conflict. There's less battle. There's less duels. There's less taking. There's less being taken. People like to take and to be taken. This is what gives us life. This is what actually makes us more than what we are. What we are now is small. And to become enlightened in a certain way is to become even smaller, to be crushed, to be nothing. The act is key. The act of conquest is key. Because without it, what is there? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm crazy, but I don't see this as a dark age because of various ideological things. It's a dark age because there's not enough fighting, not enough true fighting. There's no true battle. There's nowhere to truly give your life and to truly take life in a glorious way. This is lacking.
That's a very interesting take. I mean, it does go contrary to what people would usually assume would be this horrible Kali Yuga. But if you just look at all the people who are taken away from anything that connects them to a higher purpose, I think that there's a lot of misery in that kind of existence where you don't really have anything to live for. And when you don't really have anything to live for, then how is your life? Like, I think that's why, like, Andrew, you're noticing a lot of the SJWs putting in the pronouns. It's like, I think they're all searching for what could I do to define myself here in this reality, but I don't think any of these things are enough, and people keep self-medicating themselves with all these antidepressants and things to keep themselves in this comatose state of wanting comfort. But that comfort, I think that's going to create, as well as this division I mentioned earlier, that's going to create this misery that most people are going to be encountering in the Kali Yuga. I know, like, Andrew, if you would agree with that, and if you would see that perhaps certain aspects of what may look like a good life could result in this much more negative way people can live, and what the resolution you think could be for that.
Well, some people are definitely going to suffer, when you let's say you got a bunch of sleeping people and you pull back the curtain and all of a sudden bright light floods into the room, and if they've been sleeping for a long time, it can be painful for them. Like, what is this? What is this light? I don't like the light, even if it's the light of God. For somebody that's been living in darkness, didn't want to wake up, didn't want to see, they can have a lot of pain from that. So there's, like in the Matrix, they say people actively fight you for trying to free them from the system. Some people don't want to wake up. Some people want to live in darkness, want to live in whatever comfort they've had. And so, this is not going to be necessarily fun for everyone to start, but we're definitely going into a process, and well, this can be the ultimate.
But here's the
I've
other
got a
thing.
question for Andrew.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was going to basically put to him the question that Hotep Sophia asked the panel earlier, in that, we're talking about the Kali Yuga and difficult times and things to sort of work our way through that. What do you think, Andrew, that the Kabbalah and perhaps the study of the Zohar as well can offer someone without maybe any prior knowledge of it to help them navigate through this time? And then sort of a follow-up question, we were discussing the sort of appropriateness of respecting each different tradition in their own context. So who do you think it is appropriate to study the Kabbalah?
Well, there's levels to it. First of all, even if you don't want to study a thing, even if you're not even interested in the study, you don't have time for it, I would say people just owning the Zohar, literally having the Zohar in your car or in your house. And I think you might still be able to get one for free at either Zohar.com or Kabbalah.com. Just having the Zohar is literally like it's having the Holy Grail in your home. So having the Zohar is one thing. Opening it up and studying it with the commentary by Rav Ashlag, and that's in the English version that you can get at Zohar.com or Kabbalah.com. Studying from it, you're going to have guidance, basically. You're going to have insight. Your intuition will go way up. You know, like if life is a video game, you can work out and go to the gym and increase your strength. Studying the Zohar is going to increase your intuition. It's going to increase your guidance. So if you want any kind of spiritual connection, studying the Zohar is the best way to do it.
There was a concert that a friend of mine attended. In fact, she was here earlier, Kimberly Butler. She was in the chat. She attended, her daughter bought her tickets to a Madonna concert. And she was so mad at the end because Madonna had everybody waiting, for her to get on stage. And she was just being, pretty bad to the people there. So I don't know, like for some people it may not be as effective. I think for certain celebrities like Madonna, I mean, she's been doing it for a long time, but it's like, I don't know, like what do you make of something like that? I don't know if it would affect everybody the same way, because at least it didn't seem to affect her.
Listen, I'm not gonna say Madonna should be the model representative of where I go and study. I've seen her Super Bowl halftime shows. It's but at the same time, I know in her private life she's done amazing charity work. So who she is and where she is now. Do you know where she was 20 years ago? Do you know like what kind of transformation she's made in her life? It's very easy to judge, one little thing of this, one little thing of that, but you have no idea what kind of transformation she's made. So I'm not trying to judge her. I will say, any one person, if you want to say, oh, that person goes and studies there sometime, listen. You can look at somebody that goes to the gym and say, or gym sometimes, and he's not getting fit. But there's other people in the gym that are getting incredibly fit. So, how you use the tool is a lot of ways up to you.
Well, there's one final thing that I wanted to ask, and this is not just about the Kabbalah. This is about that differentiation I said before about either like everything being in this round, cycle, as opposed to heading towards something, which has to do with the fact that people, there are people born in this reality who are like quadriplegics, or something doesn't work right in their brain. And you know what I mean? Like there's all kinds of inequities in the kind of state you end up being born in to experience this world, which is why, and I know that actually there are rabbis out there who do believe in reincarnation. I'm not exactly remembering how exactly Yehuda Schlag is with reincarnation, but for me the idea is that we all have our own journey, and it's not something that would equally end at the finish line for everybody, because people are all different and we have different ways that we have to get to a higher state of understanding. Some of us are way down there, others may be closer to whatever point they want to reach. But that's why it's always been hard for me to square that together with this idea of like, here we go, everybody is going to get this thing regardless of where they happen to be. You know what I mean? Like that's something that I would be very interested in being addressed.
So do you know who the Ari is, Rav Yitzhak Luria?
Yes.
So he has a book literally called The Gates of Reincarnation. If there's a serious rabbi out there and he thinks reincarnation is not real, ask him what he thinks the word tikkun means.
Okay, that's part of it. The other part of it would be this, all of us coming into this reality that you talked about. How can that be squared together with then reincarnation and everybody being at these different levels?
So not everybody's experience is going to be the same. Like I said, if people aren't putting in any kind of work, they don't want to, better themselves at all, and then new high consciousness comes in, they might not experience it in such a lovely way. But people that are really trying to, do something good in this world, and they're doing their utmost, raising of consciousness is going to be real good for them.
Excellent. And do you leave room? This is a question that I've asked to other people who are here. I asked this to a Catholic speaker who was here, and I asked this to Mormons as well. Extraterrestrial life, when it comes to there being other planets, because look, we're in a big fucking galaxy over here, and the planet Earth is not exactly in the best part of the galaxy. I wouldn't say best. It's like it's not as close to the center. So if this was like a simulation game, whatever you want to call it, I would expect there to be other worlds out there that would be closer to the center, that like the Hindus refer to them as the lokas. You can be reincarnated in the better loka. I imagine maybe that better locus closer to the center. But anyway, the point is that I think that there are other worlds out there and other beings like us. How would there be room for that in the Kabbalistic tradition?
Not only is there room for it, it exists. So there you go.
Can I jump in on the simulation thing though too?
Yes.
If this is a simulation and it's a game, let's be real, man. What kind of games do we like? We like Counter-Strike. We like StarCraft. We like fighting games. Let's just be real here. If it's a game, let's have a damn good game. Let's have a great game. Let's have fun.
It could be Sims.
Sims is trash. All right,
God.
That's not a game. That's a sim.
Okay, so while Andrew is not here, I think I may be able to play devil's advocate here, or God's advocate, I guess, for what you're saying. Against what you're saying in a way, where while I agree with you, this is something that we want to do right now, there may be other forms of experience that, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about some furry, everybody hugs everybody, kumbaya
God.
bullshit. No, fuck that. What I'm talking about is just like, we have pets, we have fucking dogs and cats, and they don't know what this computer is. Like, I imagine there are certain levels of consciousness, enlightenment, whatever you want to say, that are way beyond whatever it is we can realize right now, even through the meditation and all that while you're absolutely right, this is something that we kind of live for, it may be something that is true to us in this cycle, but there may be a deeper cycle closer to the Godhead where we would experience something even beyond that we can't really put into words right now. I mean, I don't know what exactly that would be. That would be kind of like where I would lean on more. I'm not really a fan of what Andrew said regarding like, now that we're going to have, like the immortality tech and people, no, because that's not going to solve that ultimate problem. But maybe there would be other states of consciousness that, while not solving the problem ultimately, would bring us to such a state that we're not necessarily going to miss these fighting, fucking, and drinking and all these great adventures that we've had, just because there is another level of adventure for us to experience. And it's not a fucking comatose state. That's what I'm trying to get at. At least I don't think it is.
Yeah. No, I totally vibe on that. Personally, one thing, like, there can't be just an abrupt end to it all. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like with fractal cosmos, like, it's important to understand, like, time is a dimension of space. Like, time has to keep going on infinitely too. Like, and like, it always just increases its scope and scale, I think. And even when you're talking about like getting closer to gnosis, or like the next level of spirituality, like you were talking about, where we would not even miss the human experience because the next level is beyond that. Like, there's always a bigger fish, like, even like, I mean, this is just my headcanon, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Like, I think, like, the universe is literally an organism, and that it exists within even a greater, like, scope of reality. Like, reality just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and also smaller and smaller into infinity. Like, so I can't conceive of an abrupt end. And at the same time, while, the fighting, the fucking, the domination, and the being obliterated into nothingness is fun and all, you can't stagnate. You have to constantly be moving, like convection in a mantle. Like, you don't stop, because that's just entropy. That's like I think stagnation is one of the only sinful things that there is, honestly.
I think this is why the meme of Le Monkey is so important in this day and age. Because you have this monkey that's sitting down talking about poop and finding it funny. And I think within that framework, we come to this understanding that we do spend a lot of time just watching a bunch of shit online and not really that much time working. So we feel every time we stare at the screen a certain amount of degeneration going on. And that is something that I think there are people out there like BAP that address it in their way. There are people who address it in more of like the contemplation, meditation way. I think all these ways are really, are really good on the individual level to do. I would always refrain from having something being implemented on a wide scale for people because we're dealing with people who make a lot of mistakes, and whenever something gets bureaucratized, especially today, then it's always going to be, the more, how do I say it? It's always going to be the thuggish, but also influence of people who get into power and then end up using certain, nice sounding ideas to enact, something that works for them and their friends and their family and not really for everybody else. Which is why, like, I know I'm more of like a classic liberal, whatever you want to call it. Like, I believe in people's individual liberty while also realizing that it is important to have a class that would not force but really try fucking hard to influence people who are not at that stage of maybe being that much of a unique snowflake. Because for most people like NPCs or whatever you want to call them, like, they are going to want to latch on to something that gives them a bigger meaning that's present in their community, in their family, in their church, whatever you want. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that kind of stuff should be encouraged.
I think the NPCs are actually valuable. If we look at, like what I was saying earlier too, when I was saying the battle thing, it's not that everyone has this in their nature. Different people have different natures, but you cannot constrain these natures. Even if you tried, even if somebody tried to make a perfect system, it would break because the individual natures would still have ways of conflict. NPCs are meant to be channeled by a sort of master. They're meant to be taken as and amplified in a network and then set off against a different network. This is another form of warfare. This is enjoyable. This is fun. This is what we do in advertising as well. You love your customers, but they really look to you for a lot of stuff that they don't want to think about. You're giving them permission to not think about certain things. It's the exact same thing in politics. You're giving people permission to not think about certain things and to simply say, okay, I'm going to do this. It's the same with religion. Some people are just like that. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It is what it is. And you got to play your part. But if you feel in your heart like a deep call to do something and you say, no, it's bad, I think you'll destroy yourself. I think you have to face what's in yourself. You have to embrace it and run with it. That's where I come from.
Get ready for the Fed posting. That's
It reminds me of a story I heard once about these time travelers who, I guess it's okay to talk about time traveler now. This is more of the shizo part of the stream. There was this story I heard from these Russian time travelers who went back in time, and one of them stayed around, and then like they had like a daughter or something, but then the daughter ended up getting killed, and they ended up getting killed because they weren't meant to stay in that time zone. Fate has a funny way of, even if you stretch around it, kind of like bringing you back in to whatever it is that you were supposed to do. It just ends up taking longer when you kind of stray from that path. So I don't know if that applies to everything. Giorgiani definitely does not like that prospect. I want to get Jason Giorgiani on really soon, by the way, and talk to him about a lot of this stuff, because he thinks that we should be fighting against fate. That fate is a very bad thing. It's a very evil thing. And it's this order that there are all these organizations like, what do you call it? Like the Mithraic cults that have been fighting against it. He points to, for example, the Skull and Bones logo, where the bones are at 23 degrees, which is supposed to be the tilt of the Earth. And the reason why that's important to him is that that tilt is something that makes for the precession of the equinoxes, so that we have all these different ages that we get to live through where we can try to fight against an orderly fate. You can even see that, like, in the tilt of the earth. Like, it's not like this, it's like that. It's not going according to this harmonious rule if it's slightly tilted like that, and it allows for all these different experiences to happen through all these different eons. So it's an interesting for me to personally think about. But I don't know, before we go, if you would say anything about fighting against fate and any of these organizations or mystery cults or whatever you want to talk about that have been doing that kind of fight as opposed to just going with fate.
To me, this too is nature. It's the nature of some men to want to fight fate, to rebel against it. And it's good. It's beautiful. I love the story, right? Like, you're interested in it too. It's so fascinating. And then we have the certain people who want to defend fate. And I don't know what's right and what's wrong, right? I'm just out here saying I'm in the game. I love the game. It's a great game. However it plays, we can all enjoy the game, whether it's, peace or war or whatever. I'm not calling for anything crazy. I'm just saying what we have in life is good. And even though we don't understand pretty much anything, these conflicts are not necessarily bad. Like, it's just different forces. And these people really believe in what they're repping.
Yeah,
I have no idea who's right.
But then imagine being a gooner who's just like gooned out of their mind. And after they finally came, they're just laying there like that Peppa the Frog image, just completely disoriented and sapped out of energy. I don't know if anybody ever likes being in that state, so there is a longing that I think people do have to having any kind of vital life force that allows them to continue on. And as far as what happens to the people who are completely sapped of their energy from whichever means, like, that's not something that I can answer right now, but it's like I don't know, that seems to be the one negative that I do see when our energy is sapped, either through playing video games all the time or just doing something that puts us into less of a state where we can unleash our full potential. You know what I mean? Just like cloistering us in these shells of experiences that are like the allegory of the cave times 10. Because in a way, this computer is an allegory of the cave. Like, not only are we allegoried in this three-dimensional world for most people that spend it in the dream state, but now we're further allegoried of the cave on these devices when we're just interacting with these virtual things. And worse, a lot of these virtual experiences are only giving us feedback loops of things that we care about and long for. And eventually, wouldn't it happen that most of these little kids who are growing up with these fucking iPads now, they're just looking at a bunch of bright colors? And eventually, isn't that, like, going back to the monkey for a second, isn't the bright colors and the poop jokes what's going to be left for most of, like, Generation Alpha, or I don't know, whichever generations come after that? But you know what I mean? Just, like, what is happening there? Is that the Kali Yuga we were talking about earlier?
I feel sympathy for the gooners, but as well for the kids. And I see what you're saying. I'm kind of an idealist or an optimist, I guess. I think it can't possibly get to the point of like permanent degeneration that lasts. I think something will break it. I just don't know what. So I'm kind of just an optimist in that sense. But I feel you too. Like, that does make me sad to think of that sort of existence. It certainly is wretched. It's certainly not good. It's full of pain. But
I was at this barbecue, and there was this little girl there with her family, and they were showing her like these videos. I showed her a video of like How to Train Your Dragon or something, and I just noticed it was really disturbing. Like, even though I like How to Train Your Dragon, I think the animation's nice and everything. Chris Sanders, the same guy who designed Lilo and Stitch, by the way, really hot designs of that lifeguard. You remember that lifeguard from Lilo and Stitch? No?
I've never seen. I'm not familiar with most movies.
Oh, it's really good. I recommend you check it out. But anyway, that little girl, she was just staring at that screen and she looked like a zombie. You know what I mean? Like everything's just like her whole life just faded and she was just
Yeah.
staring at the screen. That was
I've seen it too, man. I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking disturbing. But anyway, I think this is something that we do have an opportunity of fighting against in our own way. And we just got Info Warlock in the chat here who says, just caught the stream late, but 100% agree with Amon. Great stream as always. Info Warlock, thank you so much for being here. And let's just do some quick shout outs before we go. Shout out Martin K, Info Warlock, Buff, Byzantium Archon, Aman Sadhu, who is joining us here as well, S's, Kyle, let's see who else we got here. I gotta scroll up. Randy Lenz, Philip Roy, newcomer Philip Roy. We have, let's see, who else? Sarah Nakomis, newcomer Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have Chimpertainment. That's nice. Chimpertainment.
That's amazing.
Chocolate. No, not chocolate. Chocolate Milk 1. AIC. SC. Let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it. I can't scroll up anymore. So guys, thank you so much for watching as always. Let me tell you what's coming up. We are going to have Free For All Friday this week. We're probably going to be talking about the Great Reset. So let's see what happens there. Yeah, you guys, go to the voice chat. I'm probably going to be eating right now, but go to the voice chat in our Discord. It is in the description. Go into the Discord, and there you can join us for a voice chat. I'm probably not going to be speaking, but whoever wants to join in Discord. Let me send the link to the chat as well for those who don't know how to get there. So here is the Discord. Anyway, we are going to have Free For All Friday talking about the Great Reset. For those who have heard about that little thing coming up from the World Economic Forum, I'm going to try my best to get some World Economic Forum adjacent people on. That would be great. I really want to try. To do it. So hope you guys can join us for that. And following that, we also have a lot of very interesting streams. So we have the following happening. All right. We have Eggman, a.k.a. Eggy, coming in on Thursday. Wait, is it Thursday? Hold on. This thing is very, very slow for me right now. Here we go. Thursday, November 5. Eggy, Thursday, November 5. And then we have... Okay, I'm not going to reveal this yet because I don't want to spoil it. November 10th and November 13th. We're going to have the Transhumanist and Prim 2 Electric Ooga Boogaloo happening Tuesday, November 17th. And we're going to have a lot more great events coming down the pipe for you guys. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe for all the newcomers who are here. And for all the old comers, you're not old. You are young at heart. I love you so much. You guys are so amazing. And that is it. I am going to stop the stream and... wishing you all the best. I am trying to find the stream button, which is why I'm still talking. Anything else you guys want to add while I look for the stream button?
Can you guys hear this harmonica?
Do it again.
I'm crying. It's so beautiful.
That sounds nice. Thank you guys. Mwah. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.